Strange how one moment can change everything you thought you knew. I used to believe my family was normal, ordinary. But I was wrong. Terribly wrong. 'Cause no family is perfect. And mine was built on lies. Dark, suffocating lies that were never meant to be uncovered. But I found the truth. And now nothing will ever be the same. The storm outside raged on, rain pelting against the windows of the old family estate. Thunder rumbled in the distance, vibrating through the walls. I stood in the dusty attic, clutching an old worn-out leather journal in my trembling hands. The pages were yellowed, the handwriting delicate and familiar. It was my grandmother's. But the words I was reading, they couldn't be real. They couldn't be real. To my dearest Ruth, every moment with you feels like a forbidden dream I never want to wake from. I know this is wrong, but I can't stay away. Your touch, your warmth, it feels like home. The words blurred as my mind raced. Ruth, my mother's name. And the handwriting. It belonged to Helen, my grandmother. I wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding. Joke. Something that could be explained. But deep down I knew the truth. My grandmother and my mother. They were lovers. How long had this been going on? Was it in the past? Or was it still happening? I flipped through the journal desperately, my heart pounding in my chest. Every page was filled with hidden meetings, secret touches, and confessions of love. This wasn't just a fleeting mistake. It was a relationship, an affair. And it had been going on for years. Suddenly, memories I had long ignored started piecing themselves together. The lingering touches between them during family dinners. The way my grandmother would brush my mother's hair so slowly, lovingly. The overnight spa trips they often took alone. The private whispers I was told were just mother-daughter secrets. Well, they weren't mother-daughter secrets. They were something far darker. Something no one in the family was supposed to know. Something no one in the family was supposed to know. But now I did. And I couldn't unknow it. A folded piece of paper slipped out from between the pages. My hands trembled as I opened it. It wasn't from the past. It was recent. Meet me in the garden house at midnight. No one will find us there. Need you. R. My mother, Ruth. The garden house. I suddenly remembered that old structure behind the estate, covered in vines, abandoned, or so I thought. The wind howled as I crept outside, the cold biting at my skin. Every step felt heavier than the last. The garden house loomed in the darkness, its wooden frame creaking against the wind. I reached for the rusty doorknob, hesitating. Was I really ready to know the truth? Was I really ready to see the truth? Slowly I turned it. The door groaned open, and there they were, my mother and my grandmother, locked in an embrace that wasn't motherly, not even close. My mother's fingers softly traced my grandmother's face. Their foreheads pressed together, eyes closed in quiet intimacy. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Every bone in my body screamed to run. But I stood there, frozen, watching the truth. Every bone in my body screamed to run. But I stood there, frozen, watching the truth unfold before me. My mother whispered, barely audible over the wind. No one will ever know. I can't. We'll lose everything. No one will ever know. But now I did. And I wasn't supposed to. A floorboard creaked beneath me. Their heads snapped in my direction. My mother's eyes locked onto mine. My mother's eyes locked onto mine. Her face paled, mouth slightly open in shock. My grandmother's expression twisted into something different. Not fear. Not guilt. But anger. Elena. What are you doing here? My mother's voice was a fragile whisper, but my grandmother's was cold and sharp. I took a step back, heart racing. I didn't answer. Couldn't. I just ran. Ran back into the night, the wind howling behind me. Ran back into the night, the wind howling behind me. But even the storm couldn't drown out the sound of my grandmother's chilling voice calling after me. We need to talk, Elena. Now. I slammed the door shut, locking it behind me. My mind was spinning. What had I just seen? What was I supposed to do? If anyone else found out, would they believe? Would they believe me? Or would they turn against me to protect the family secret? I collapsed onto the floor, gripping the journal tightly. The words blurred through my tears. This was the truth. And now I was a part of it. But how long could I keep it buried? And if I didn't, what would they do to me? They say every family has secrets. But mine wasn't just hiding skeletons in the closet. My family was built on them. And now, I wasn't sure if I could survive the weight of the truth I had just uncovered. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes I saw them. My mother. My grandmother. Not as family. Not as people I trusted. But as something else. Something twisted. How long had this been going on? And why did it feel like I was the only one who didn't know? The journal lay on the floor beside me, its cracked leather cover taunting me. The pages inside weren't stories. They were confessions, memories, moments I was never meant to see. But now I had. And I couldn't pretend otherwise. Morning light poured into the kitchen, but it did nothing to warm the cold tension that filled the air. I sat stiffly at the table, staring at the untouched plate in front of me. Grandma Helen hummed softly as she stirred sugar into her tea. Her movements calm, precise. Mom Ruth was unusually quiet, sipping her coffee, her eyes never meeting mine. The silence was unbearable. I could hear the ticking of the antique clock on the wall, each second heavier than the last. Helen finally broke the silence. "You didn't sleep well, dear." Her tone was casual. Too casual. I didn't respond. She looked up slowly, her cold gray eyes locking onto mine. "We should talk. Privately." My throat tightened. I forced a nod, my pulse quickening. But before I could speak, Mom stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Not now, Mother," she snapped, her voice shaking. Helen's expression didn't change. "Yes, now." The way she said it sent a chill down my spine. Mom slowly sat back down, her hands trembling slightly. No one spoke after that. But the silence said everything. Minutes later, I followed Helen into the old library. The heavy wooden doors creaked shut behind me, sealing us in. The room smelled of dust and aged paper. Books lined every wall, their spines untouched for decades. Helen moved to the window, gazing out at the stormy sky. "I suppose you think you know everything now." Her voice was low, calm. I swallowed hard. "I know enough." She turned slowly, her face unreadable. "Whoa, you don't." Helen stepped closer, and I instinctively backed away. "What you saw. It wasn't what you think." I let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, really? Then what exactly did I see?" Her cold eyes narrowed. "You saw a bond. One that has held this family together through things you couldn't possibly understand. That wasn't a bond. It was wrong." Helen tilted her head. "Wrong? Who decided that? You. Society. This family survived because of that bond." Her voice was sharp now, cutting through the air like a blade. "Without me, without your mother and me, this family would have fallen apart years ago." I shook my head, disgusted. "You're sick." A faint smirk tugged at the corner of her lips. "You're so young, Elena. So naive." She turned back toward the window. "Be careful where your curiosity leads you. Not all truths are safe." I stormed back to my room, my hands shaking. I needed answers. More than what Helen was willing to give. If she wouldn't tell me, I'd find out myself. I tore through the drawers in my mother's dresser. Papers, old photos, nothing. Then I noticed a loose panel behind the mirror. My hands hesitated for a moment before prying it open. Inside was a small locked box. I didn't have the key. But I didn't need one. I slammed it against the corner of the dresser until it cracked open. Inside were letters. More letters. But these weren't between my grandmother and my mother. These were from another woman. Letters addressed to Helen. The handwriting was delicate, familiar. But the name at the bottom chilled me to the bone. Lydia. My great-grandmother. I sank to the floor, scanning the letters. They were filled with the same longing, the same forbidden affection, the same twisted love. It wasn't just my grandmother and my mother. This had been happening for generations. Cycle. Passed down like an heirloom. My stomach turned. How deep did this go? Was this some kind of curse on our family? Or a choice, made over and over again? That night as I lay in bed, I felt the door creak open slightly. Froze. A shadow slipped into the room. Helen. She stood at the foot of my bed, her figure illuminated by the moonlight. I see you've been busy. Her voice was soft, almost amused. I warned you, Elena. Some truths should stay buried. I didn't move, didn't speak. Her eyes gleamed in the dark. This family has survived because we protect our own. She leaned in closer. But if you threaten that, I won't hesitate to protect it again. And then she was gone. The door clicked shut behind her. I stared into the dark, my breath shallow. What did she mean by again? What had she done to keep this secret before? And more importantly, what was she willing to do now? Some secrets are buried for a reason. But I wasn't ready to stop digging. Even as the darkness around me thickened, even as every discovery made me question everything I thought I knew, I couldn't stop. Because the more I uncovered, the more I realized this wasn't just a secret. It was a curse. One that had been passed down for generations. And I was next. I stared at the old, crumpled letters spread across my bed. The name at the bottom of each letter stared back at me. Lydia. My great-grandmother. Her words echoed in my mind, each line drenched in the same longing and secrecy I had seen between my mother and grandmother. Your touch feels like home, Helen. We must be careful, but I can't stay away. The handwriting was delicate, the ink faded, but the meaning was clear. This wasn't the first time. My grandmother hadn't just fallen into this. She had inherited it. A cycle of forbidden love, buried in whispers and locked drawers. Felt sick. But I couldn't stop now. Driven by a need for answers, I went to the old family photo albums stacked in the dusty hallway closet. These albums had been on our shelves for years, untouched. But now they seemed like a map to the past. I flipped through page after page. Smiling faces, family vacations, weddings. But as I studied the photos closer, something felt off. In one photo, my grandmother Helen and my mother Ruth stood side by side at a family picnic. But the way Helen's hand rested on my mother's waist, too familiar, too intimate. The way they gazed at each other in another photo, when no one else was looking. It wasn't motherly affection. It was something else. And in the corner of several photos, small symbols were drawn in faint ink. A small circle with a line through it. It wasn't on every photo. Only on the ones where Helen and Ruth were together. What did it mean? Was this some kind of secret code? I turned the pages faster, searching for more. Then, tucked behind one of the albums, I found a sealed envelope. It wasn't labeled. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single photograph. Black and white. It showed Helen as a young woman, no older than 20. But she wasn't alone. She was standing beside Lydia, my great-grandmother. The way they stood together, arms entwined, foreheads touching, was unmistakable. They weren't just family. They were lovers. The house felt heavier now, like its walls were pressing in on me. I couldn't breathe. I needed answers. And there was only one person who could give them to me. I found her in the kitchen, staring blankly out the window, coffee growing cold in her hands. "Mom," I said, my voice barely steady. She didn't turn around. "Elena, not now." "No, now." I slammed the photograph onto the counter. Her eyes finally met mine. And I saw it. The recognition. The guilt. The fear. "Where did you find this?" she whispered. "Don't act like you don't know what this is." Her hands trembled. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." Silence. "Tell me." She flinched. "It's complicated, Elena." "Oh, it's sick." Her eyes hardened. You think I wanted this, she snapped. Then what was it? Her lips trembled, but before she could answer, Helen entered the room. Her presence sucked the air out of the space. Enough, Helen said, voice icy and calm. This conversation ends now. I turned to her, fury boiling. Oh, doesn't. You owe me the truth. She smiled faintly. The truth. The truth is dangerous, Elena. Helen stepped closer, her shadow swallowing mine. You're playing a game you're not ready for. Walk away. I won't. Her eyes narrowed. Then you better be ready to lose. Later that night my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. Unknown caller. I hesitated, then answered. Elena. The voice was soft, unsure. Who is this? It's Aunt Sarah. Froze. My mother's estranged sister. She hadn't been around for years. Why are you calling me? I heard. You've started asking questions. What do you know? Her breath caught. Meet me at the old pier. Tonight. I can tell you everything. But you need to be careful. They're watching. Who's watching? But the line went dead. Fog rolled in off the water as I approached the old pier. The wood creaked under my weight. In the distance, a figure leaned against a post. Aunt Sarah. She looked older, worn down, eyes darting nervously. You shouldn't have come here alone, she said quietly. Tell me what's going on. She glanced around. It's not just your mother and grandmother, Elena. It's been in our family for generations. A bond. Sickness. I tried to stop it. That's why I left. Why didn't you tell anyone? Her voice broke. Because people who try to expose the truth. They disappear. Disappear. Sarah leaned in, voice barely a whisper. Do you remember Uncle James? I nodded slowly. He found out. And now he's gone. My blood ran cold. Gone how? She looked at me with haunted eyes. They made sure no one would ever find him. Somewhere in the shadows, far from the pier, a figure watched us. Silent. Unseen. A soft click of a lighter echoed faintly. A cigarette lit up the darkness. And the figure whispered to no one. She knows too much. Some secrets are meant to stay buried. But once they surface, they don't just haunt you. They consume you. And now, the walls of my family home weren't just walls. They were traps. And every creak of the floorboards felt like a warning. I wasn't safe anymore. Not in this house. Not with them. The dim glow of my bedside lamp cast long shadows on the walls. The letters, the photos, the evidence. They were all scattered across my bed like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit. But the biggest piece was missing. Why? Why would my mother and grandmother risk everything for this twisted bond? And how deep did this go? My phone buzzed, pulling me from my spiraling thoughts. A new text. Unknown number. Stop digging. You won't like what you find. My blood ran cold. I stared at the screen, my breath caught in my throat. Who was this? Was it Helen? Mom? Or someone else entirely? Quickly typed back. Who is this? No response. Just silence. But the message was clear. I wasn't just uncovering secrets. I was being watched. The old house groaned as I slowly opened my bedroom door. Every creak of the wooden floor felt louder in the stillness of the night. I wasn't imagining it anymore. Someone was moving through the house. I could feel it. The soft rustle of fabric. The faint whisper of footsteps. I tightened my grip on my phone, using its faint light to guide me. Down the hallway, a door creaked open slowly. The library. The very room where Helen had warned me to stop digging. I hesitated. Then, step by step, I approached. The room smelled of old wood and dust. The curtains were drawn, casting the room in shadow. But something was different. A book on the shelf had been pulled out just enough to catch the eye. I reached for it. Blick. The sound of shifting gears echoed behind the walls. Slowly, the bookshelf slid open, revealing a narrow, dark corridor. Hidden passage. Of course there would be a hidden passage. My pulse quickened. Without thinking, I stepped inside. The narrow corridor led to a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with old portraits. But these weren't displayed proudly. They were hidden here, away from the world. Portraits of Helen, Ruth, and women I didn't recognize. Generations of women. But in each portrait, there was something eerily similar. Each pair stood too close. Arms linked, gazes too intense, too intimate. And then I saw it. Family tree carved into the wall. But it wasn't like any family tree I'd ever seen. The lines between generations were blurred. Branches crossed where they shouldn't. Names repeated in ways that made no sense. It wasn't a family tree. It was a web. A tangled, messy web of relationships that defied understanding. And at the center of it was one word, carved deeper than the rest. Blood. The air grew colder. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Low. Deliberate. I wasn't alone. Panic surged through me. I extinguished the light on my phone and pressed myself against the cold stone wall. The footsteps stopped just outside the hidden door. Silence. I know you're in there, Elena. It was Helen. Her voice was soft but edged with something darker. Curiosity is a dangerous thing. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Please just go away. But she didn't. You think you're the first to question this family. Her tone was almost amused. You won't be the last. But you won't win either. I took care of the others. Don't think I won't do the same to you. I bit my lip to keep from gasping. The step. Slow fading footsteps. She was leaving. But her words stayed, wrapping around me like chains. I took care of the others. Who were the others? As the silence returned, my eyes caught something new. One of the portraits on the far wall was crooked. I moved closer and tilted it aside. Behind it, carved into the wall, was a single phrase. Find the roots, and you'll kill the tree. Find the roots. What did it mean? Was it a warning? A clue? I snapped a photo of it with my phone. But the noise was louder than I expected. Too loud. Froze. Somewhere behind me, something scraped against the floor. Slowly. Deliberately. I wasn't alone. Not anymore. Bolted. The corridor felt endless, the walls closing in. Footsteps thundered behind me, getting closer. I burst through the sliding bookshelf, slamming it shut behind me. My chest heaved as I leaned against the cold wood. But I wasn't safe. Not yet. I sprinted back to my room, locked the door, and slid to the floor. My hands trembled as I stared at the photo on my phone. Find the roots, and you'll kill the tree. Whatever this meant. It was my only chance to end this. But the question remained. What if the roots weren't just secrets? What if they were people? My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Or you'll end up just like James. My breath caught in my throat. James. Uncle James. The one who disappeared. They weren't just threatening me. They were warning me. This family destroys anyone who tries to tell the truth. And now, I was next. They say if you pull at a single thread, the whole tapestry unravels. But I didn't just pull. I tore it apart. And now, I was standing in the ruins of what I once thought was my family. But the worst part. I was starting to wonder if I was ever truly part of this family. Or just another pawn in their sick game. I couldn't stop staring at the message on my phone. Unknown number. Or you'll end up just like James. Uncle James. The family never spoke about him. I was told he left. That he couldn't handle the family pressure. But now, I knew that was a lie. What did they mean by end up like James? Had Helen, had my family, done something to him? Find the roots, and you'll kill the tree. That message carved behind the portrait echoed in my mind. If I wanted to survive, I had to understand this family's roots. But how far did they go? I needed answers. Real ones. And I knew exactly where to look. The study. Helen's sanctuary. Place where no one was allowed. But tonight I didn't care. The house was still, cloaked in heavy silence. I crept down the hallway, every shadow stretching long under the moonlight. The study door was locked. Course it was. But Helen wasn't the only one with secrets. I remembered the old skeleton key my father once used, buried in the drawer by the hallway table. I grabbed it, my hand trembling as it slid into the lock. Click. The door creaked open. The study was colder than I expected. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with aged leather-bound books. But it wasn't the books that caught my attention. It was the filing cabinet tucked in the corner, rusted and barely noticeable. I knelt down, slowly pulling it open. Inside, folders upon folders, each labeled with a name. James, Pearl, Lydia, Ruth, Elena. My own name. Chills shot through me. I pulled out the folder marked James. Inside were newspaper clippings. A missing persons report. But one headline stood out. Local man disappears without a trace. Case closed without leads. Closed. Why was it closed so quickly? And why did my grandmother have this file? Then I saw it. Photo. James standing with Helen. But the photo wasn't normal. His face was circled in red ink, and below it, scrawled in jagged handwriting. He got too close. My breath caught. Got too close to what? I flipped through the other files, heart pounding. Aunt Carol. Jason. Her file was thin. Just one note. Unstable. Couldn't handle the truth. What truth? Then I opened Lydia's folder. The woman who started it all. Letters. Diagrams. And a photo. Lydia and Helen. Standing in front of a house I didn't recognize. On the back of the photo, a single word was written. Root. A house. It wasn't on our property. But I knew it. It was the old cottage at the edge of the woods. Abandoned for years. Helen always told me to stay away from it. It's unsafe, she would say. But now I knew better. Had to go there. I slipped outside, the cold air biting at my skin. The woods were silent, except for the crunch of leaves under my feet. The cottage stood dark and forgotten, vines crawling up its sides. I hesitated only for a moment before pushing the door open. The air inside was stale, thick with dust. But it wasn't empty. Not at all. Photographs lined the walls. Old, faded. Every generation of women in my family. But none of them with their husbands. Only with each other. And then I saw the carvings. Names etched into the walls. Lydia. Helen. Ruth. Elena. My own name. But it wasn't alone. It was connected by a line. To another name I didn't recognize. Abigail. Who was Abigail? Faint draft caught my attention. There was a gap between the floorboards. I pried them open, revealing a staircase leading underground. Dark. Cold. But I couldn't stop now. I descended slowly, the air growing colder with each step. At the bottom was a small room. Candles. Photographs. And in the center, a journal. Opened it. The handwriting was old but legible. The bond must continue. It is the way of our bloodline. To protect what is ours. James tried to break the cycle. We couldn't allow it. Tears blurred my vision. James didn't disappear. They made him disappear. And now they were watching me. Waiting for me to step out of line. A floorboard creaked above me. I wasn't alone. A step. Low. Deliberate. I backed into the corner, clutching the journal. The door creaked open. A figure stood at the top of the stairs. Not Helen. Not Ruth. Someone else. You shouldn't have come here, Elena. The voice was low. Now you know what happens to those who don't belong. They always say curiosity killed the cat. But they never talk about what happens when curiosity turns into survival. I thought the secrets I uncovered were the worst things I'd ever face. But I was wrong. Because the deeper I dug, the more I realized. I wasn't alone in this. Someone else was watching. And they didn't want me to leave. The figure at the top of the stairs didn't move. Their silhouette blocked the faint moonlight pouring through the cracked door above. You shouldn't have come here, Elena. The voice was calm, almost familiar, yet cold enough to send a chill down my spine. Who are you? No response. Only silence. And then, slowly, the figure began to descend the steps, one foot after another, deliberate and slow. I gripped the journal tighter, my breath shallow. What do you want? The figure stopped halfway down the stairs. To protect the family. That phrase echoed in my head, a warning I had heard before. Protect the family. The very same words Helen had used. But this wasn't Helen. I don't need protection, I snapped, trying to steady my voice. A quiet chuckle slipped from the figure. Oh, but you do. From yourself. And then the figure stepped into the dim candlelight. My heart stopped. It was Aunt Carol. But she looked nothing like the woman I remembered. Her eyes were hollow, her face thinner, her hair a tangled mess. Aunt Carol, I whispered in disbelief. She tilted her head slightly, her lips curling into a faint, unsettling smile. You should have listened to them, Elena. Some truths destroy you. But you left, years ago, I stammered, taking a step back. I didn't leave, she whispered, her voice barely audible. They made me disappear. Just like James. Her eyes darted to the journal clutched in my hands. Ah, you found it. I tightened my grip instinctively. What is this? Why was it hidden? Carol's expression darkened. Because it holds the truth. The kind that tears families apart. Lydia started it. Helen perfected it. Started what? She slowly stepped closer. The cycle. Cycle of what? I demanded. Control. Power. Through intimacy. Through manipulation. It's how our family survives. They call it love, but it's not. It's ownership. My stomach churned. Why didn't you stop it? Carol's laugh was bitter. Tried. That's why I'm here, forgotten. James tried to. And they ended him. So why are you here now? Her smile faded. To give you a choice. Look away. Burn that journal. Pretend you know nothing. Or what? Or you'll end up like me, or worse. My mind raced. Carol had been hidden away for years, a ghost in the family's history. But why? Was she a victim or part of the game? You expect me to trust you. Snap. She tilted her head. Whoa. I expect you to survive. Suddenly, a sharp creak echoed from above. Both of us froze. They're here, Carol whispered. Who? Helen. The front door groaned open. Footsteps, slow, heavy, crept across the wooden floorboards above. We need to move. Why should I trust you? Her eyes burned into mine. Because I'm not the one you should fear right now. Carol rushed to the corner of the basement and pulled aside a dusty tarp, revealing another hidden passage. This leads to the old greenhouse. It's been abandoned for years. They won't look there. I hesitated. Or you can stay here and ask Helen all your questions, she sneered. A loud thud echoed from upstairs. No time to think. I followed Carol into the dark tunnel, the air thick with dampness and rot. What happens if they find us? I whispered. They won't. If you stay quiet. But I wasn't so sure. Because I was starting to realize something far more terrifying. It wasn't just Helen. It wasn't just Ruth. It was the whole family. The tunnel ended in the collapsed ruins of the old greenhouse. Glass shards glittered in the moonlight. Overgrown vines strangled the structure. No one comes here anymore, Carol whispered. I turned to her. Why now? Why come back now? She sighed, running a hand through her tangled hair. Because you've stirred the hive. Helen isn't patient. She's not going to scare you off, she's going to erase you. Just like James. She nodded slowly. But you're different. They're scared of you. Because if you speak, others will listen. Then why don't you speak? Her face twisted in pain. Because no one listens to ghosts. I sat down on the cold stone floor, gripping the journal tightly. There has to be a way to stop this. Carol's expression darkened. There is. But it's not easy. Tell me. She leaned in close, her voice barely a whisper. You have to sever the roots. That's the only way to kill the tree. What does that mean? Carol hesitated. You'll figure it out. But be careful. They're always watching. Suddenly, The faint sound of footsteps crunched in the distance. Not from the tunnel. From the greenhouse door. "They found us," Carol hissed. "Run." I bolted through the broken glass and overgrown vines, my breath ragged. The sound of footsteps grew louder behind me. They were closing in. And in that moment I realized something chilling. It wasn't just Helen. It wasn't just Ruth. They weren't acting alone. The entire family was hunting me. And I had nowhere left to hide. They say blood is thicker than water. But what if your blood is poisoned? What if the very people meant to protect you are the ones hunting you? I thought I could handle the truth. But I was wrong. Because this wasn't just a family secret. It was a legacy. Curse. And now I was running for my life. Branches tore at my arms as I pushed through the tangled vines surrounding the old greenhouse. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. Behind me, I could hear the crunch of footsteps, deliberate, closing in. "Elena." My mother's voice. Soft, almost coaxing. "Come back, darling. Let's talk." Her tone sent a cold shiver down my spine. Well, there was no talking. Not anymore. I bolted deeper into the woods, my breath ragged, heart pounding against my ribs. Every rustling leaf, every snapping twig felt like a threat. And maybe they were. Because I wasn't just running from them. I was running from a family I no longer recognized. I didn't stop running until the trees thinned and an old, rotting cabin emerged from the darkness. I had forgotten this place even existed. A hunting cabin my grandfather had built decades ago. Helen always told me to stay away from it. It's not safe there. Now I understood why. I pushed the creaking door open and slipped inside. Dust and cobwebs clung to every surface. The air was still, suffocating. But at least it was shelter. For now. I leaned against the cold wall, trying to steady my breath. The journal weighed heavy in my hands. I opened it again, flipping to the back where loose pages had been tucked. One page caught my eye. It was a family tree. But not like any I had seen before. Names were crossed out. Others circled in red. And at the bottom, one phrase was scrawled in frantic handwriting. "Break the cycle or become it." My name Elena was circled. And next to it another name. Abigail. That name again. But this time, a thin arrow connected Abigail's name to mine. "Who are you?" I whispered. A sudden rustle outside snapped me to attention. I grabbed a rusted iron poker from the fireplace and pressed myself against the wall. The door creaked open. "Elena." It was Aunt Carol. Her face was pale, her breath uneven. "They're close. We don't have much time." "Who is Abigail?" I demanded, holding up the journal. Carol's face darkened. "Oh, not now. Tell me." She hesitated. Abigail was Helen's first daughter. Before Ruth. But I thought Ruth was. Oh. Abigail was erased. Erased from photos, from stories. Helen made everyone forget her. Why? Carol's voice dropped to a whisper. Because Abigail tried to end it. The cycle. The same one you're trying to end now. My knees nearly buckled. What happened to her? Carol's eyes filled with fear. She didn't make it. Before I could respond, a faint rhythmic thudding echoed through the trees. But. It wasn't footsteps. It was something heavier. More deliberate. "They're hurting us," Carol muttered, eyes wide. "What do you mean?" "They're pushing us where they want us to go." She was right. They weren't chasing us randomly. They were controlling our path. We need to move. Oh. We need to fight back. Carol grabbed my arm. "You don't fight Helen. You survive her." We slipped out the back of the cabin, moving deeper into the woods. But every turn we took felt wrong. Every path seemed to loop back. And then I saw it. A flicker of light in the distance. Torchlight. Figures moving between the trees. Low. Purposeful. Surrounding us. "They've done this before," Carol whispered. "They know how to trap their own." I tightened my grip on the journal. "We need to get to the river. If we cross it, they can't follow as easily." Carol hesitated but nodded. We turned sharply, running towards the faint sound of rushing water. But as we neared, the ground gave way beneath me. Pit. Lined with sharpened stakes. I barely caught the edge, my body dangling over the abyss. Carol yanked me back just in time. They planned this. They want us scared, disoriented. But I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. Not anymore. As we moved cautiously along the riverbank, a cold voice cut through the air. Enough games. Helen. She stood on the other side of the river, torch in hand. Mom stood beside her, expression unreadable. Come home, Elena. Let's fix this. Her voice was soft, but I knew better. Fix it. Back. You mean erase me like you did Abigail? Helen's eyes narrowed. Abigail was weak. You're not. Don't make the same mistake. I held up the journal. I know everything now. And I'm not afraid. Helen's lips curled into a cold smile. Oh, but you should be. She nodded slightly. And from the shadows, other figures stepped forward. Not just family. Strangers. Followers. This wasn't just a family tradition. It was something bigger. Darker. Cult of control. You can't run from blood, Elena. Her voice was calm. It's in you. And in that moment I realized the truth. Helen didn't want to destroy me. She wanted to recruit me. To make me part of the cycle. But I wasn't going to let that happen. Not now. Not ever. They weren't just chasing me. They were chasing the truth. And now I knew too much. But the deeper I ran, the more I realized. This wasn't just about survival. This was about ending something far darker than I could have imagined. The family's secret wasn't just a story of betrayal. It was a legacy of control. And they would do anything to protect it. The cold night air clawed at my skin as I stumbled deeper into the forest. The distant glow of torches flickered between the trees. Their voices echoed through the woods. Calm, steady, patient. They weren't in a rush. They didn't have to be. Because they knew these woods better than I ever could. They had done this before. Elena, slow down. Carol hissed behind me, struggling to keep up. But I couldn't stop. Every instinct in me screamed to run. Where are we going? She demanded. Anywhere they aren't. Snap. But the truth was I didn't know. The trees blurred around me. The forest floor uneven and treacherous. Wait, stop. Carol grabbed my arm, yanking me behind a large fallen tree. I nearly screamed, but she clamped a hand over my mouth. Through the gaps in the branches I saw them. Helen, Ruth, and others. They moved slowly, deliberately, scanning the woods. Helen's torch cast long shadows on the trees, her face as calm and composed as ever. Spread out, Helen ordered, her voice low but commanding. She couldn't have gone far. I held my breath, my heart pounding so loud I feared they would hear it. Carol leaned in, her voice barely a whisper. We can't outrun them. But we can outsmart them. How? Mouth. Her eyes flickered with something I hadn't seen before, fear. We need to find the route. We moved slowly now, crouched low, slipping between the shadows. What did you mean by the route? I asked, my voice barely audible. Carol's eyes darted around nervously. It's not just a metaphor. It's real. Helen isn't just keeping secrets. She's protecting something. Protecting what? The place where it all began. Her grip tightened on my arm. If we find it, we can end this. I thought of the phrase carved into the wall in the hidden passage. Find the roots, and you'll kill the tree. It wasn't a riddle. It was a direction. Where is it? Carol hesitated. There's an old cellar on the far end of the property. No one goes there. Not even Helen. But it's locked. Always has been. Then that's where we're going. The path to the cellar was overgrown, nearly invisible beneath thick vines and twisted roots. The air grew colder as we neared it. A small, crumbling stone structure half buried in the earth. The wooden door was rotting, but a heavy iron lock kept it sealed. This is it, Carol whispered. How do we get in? She pulled a rusted iron key from her pocket. James gave this to me before he disappeared. He told me never to come here. But I think he wanted me to. The lock groaned as the key turned, and the door creaked open. Cold, damp breath of air met us. Stale and suffocating. We descended slowly, our steps echoing in the dark. The walls were lined with old bricks, slick with moisture. And then, the passage opened into a massive underground chamber. The room was filled with family artifacts, old photographs, heirlooms, and shelves of journals. But what caught my eye was the tree. Its roots stretched across the stone floor, twisted and blackened, intertwining with the walls. Carved into its bark were names. Generations of women. Helen, Ruth, Lydia, and then Abigail. Her name was crossed out violently. And below it, a new name had been carved. Elena. My knees nearly buckled. They were preparing me. Carol nodded grimly. It's not just about keeping the secret. It's about continuing it. Passing it on. Oh, I won't let them. I stepped closer to the dead tree. In its gnarled bark, a small latch was hidden. I pulled it open, revealing a hollow inside. And within it, box, smooth black with strange markings. Carol gasped. I've only heard stories. That's the heart of the family. What's inside? I don't know. But Helen would kill to protect it. As I reached for the box, a voice echoed through the chamber. Touch it and you die. Helen. She stepped from the shadows, torch in hand, her eyes glinting. Beside her, Ruth stared blankly, her face pale and expressionless. Helen smiled coldly. I told you, Elena. The truth is dangerous. She raised her hand. And from the shadows, more figures emerged. More family. More followers. All of them silent. All of them watching. Give me the box, Helen said softly. I shook my head slowly. No. Helen's smile didn't fade. Then you've chosen your fate. The ground trembled beneath us. The roots of the dead tree began to shift and crack. She's collapsing the chamber. Carol screamed. Helen's calm expression didn't falter. If I can't protect the legacy, I'll bury it, and you with it. Rocks and dirt rained down from the ceiling. Run! I clutched the black box and bolted toward the narrow passageway, Carol at my heels. Behind us, the walls cracked, the ceiling groaning. Helen's cold laughter echoed behind us. But we didn't stop. Not this time. We burst through the cellar door, coughing and gasping for air. The ground rumbled beneath us as the chamber collapsed. But we had the box, the heart of the family, and I knew whatever was inside, it was the key to ending this. Carol stared at me, eyes wide. What now? I looked down at the black box in my hands. Now we burn the roots. Some secrets are hidden for a reason. But what happens when you drag them into the light? The truth doesn't set you free. It tightens its grip. And now, holding the heart of this family in my hands, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just holding secrets. I was holding a weapon. But would it destroy them or me? The ground still trembled beneath our feet as Carol and I stumbled through the tangled underbrush, coughing on dust and dirt. Behind us, the old cellar had caved in, swallowing Helen's carefully guarded secrets. But not all of them. Because in my hands I still held the black box. Smooth, cold, and impossibly heavy for its size. What's in it? I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Carol didn't answer right away. Her wide, fearful eyes were fixed on the box. I don't know. But whatever it is, Helen was willing to die to protect it. I ran my fingers over the strange carvings etched into the surface. Symbols I didn't recognize. But they felt ancient. Well, we need to open it. Carol's hand shot out, gripping my wrist. No. Why not? Because once it's open, we can't undo it. Undo what? Her silence was louder than any answer she could give. The cold night air gnawed at our skin as we pressed deeper into the woods. Finally, through the dense trees, a shadowy structure appeared. An old hunter's cabin, long abandoned. Its windows were shattered, the door barely hanging on its hinges. But it was shelter. We slipped inside, the rotting wood groaning beneath our weight. The air was thick with mildew and decay. But it was safe. For now. I dropped to the floor, placing the box between us. Carol kept her distance, arms crossed tightly over her chest. "We can't keep running forever," I said. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine. "I'm not running. I'm surviving. There's a difference." She didn't answer. I stared at the box. Its surface seemed to pulse faintly, like it was alive. Or maybe that was just my mind playing tricks on me. I couldn't wait any longer. Slowly, I began to pry open the lid. "Elena, don't." But it was too late. The box creaked open, releasing a soft hiss of stale air. Inside was a stack of letters, old, brittle, tied together with a crimson ribbon. And beneath them a small, ornate mirror, its silver frame tarnished with age. But the reflection wasn't right. It shimmered unnaturally, almost like liquid. "Letters," Carol whispered, inching closer. I carefully lifted the top one, unfolding the delicate parchment. The handwriting was familiar. Helen's. To the next in line. "If you are reading this, then the cycle is at risk. You must understand that what we protect is more than tradition. It is power. Our family was chosen, and with that comes responsibility. To preserve, to control, to endure. Do not betray the blood, or suffer the fate of those who did." The bottom, a symbol. The same one carved into the box. A circle split by a jagged line. I set the letter aside and picked up the mirror. "It's just a mirror," I muttered. But Carol shook her head. "Whoa. Look closer." I stared into it. First I saw only my reflection. But then, it shifted. The cabin around me melted away, replaced by a different room. A darkened parlor, lit by candlelight. Helen stood in the reflection, but not as I knew her. She was younger, standing beside another woman, Ruth. But they weren't mother and daughter in this image. They were lovers. Helen's hand rested on Ruth's cheek, tender and intimate. Then Helen's eyes snapped up. And in the mirror she stared directly at me. "She sees us," Carol gasped, yanking the mirror away. The image shattered like glass, and the mirror went dark. The sudden ringing of my phone shattered the silence. I grabbed it, heart pounding. Unknown number. Open another letter. "I dare you." I nearly dropped the phone. Carol's face drained of color. "She knows." "Oh." The chamber collapsed. Carol shook her head slowly. "It doesn't matter. The family's watching us everywhere. Always." I swallowed hard, staring at the unopened letters. "We have to finish this." Carol grabbed my arm. "Whoa. You don't understand. Helen isn't afraid of us reading these letters. She's afraid of what happens when we do. Then maybe that's exactly why we need to read them." I tore the ribbon from the next letter. This one wasn't written by Helen. It was from Abigail. "To whoever finds this." I tried to stop her. Failed. "If you found the box, then you must destroy it. Do not read these. Every word pulls you deeper. Every truth makes it harder to leave. Burn them. Before she finds you." My hands trembled. Abigail wanted to destroy this. And Helen wanted to protect it, Carol said grimly. "So what do we do?" Before I could answer, there was a soft knock on the cabin door. Once. Low. Deliberate. We froze. They found us. The door creaked open. But it wasn't Helen. It was Ruth. Her eyes were hollow. Her face pale. And in her hand, she held a lit match. "You should have burned it when you had the chance." She let the match drop. The cabin erupted into flames. They say fire cleanses. But sometimes fire is used to destroy, to erase. And in that moment, staring into the flames, I realized something terrifying. My family wasn't trying to protect their secret. They were trying to burn it to the ground, including me. The flames roared to life in an instant. The dry, rotting wood of the cabin caught fire like it had been waiting for this moment. Smoke filled the air, thick and choking. Ruth stood in the doorway, the flames casting a twisted glow on her pale, emotionless face. Her eyes locked on mine, cold, detached. "You should have burned it when you had the chance." Her words echoed in my ears as the flames lunged toward us. "Run!" Carol yanked me backward, dragging me toward the back of the cabin. The walls groaned and cracked, sending embers showering down like fiery rain. "The window!" Carol shouted, coughing violently. We scrambled toward a small, shattered window in the back. But the smoke was suffocating. My vision blurred, my lungs screamed for air. The black box was still in my hands, heavier than ever. "We can't leave it," gasped. Carol's grip tightened on my arm. "It doesn't matter if we're dead, Elena." She hoisted herself up, kicking out the last shards of glass from the frame. Without thinking, I shoved the box through and followed, feeling the searing heat kiss the back of my neck. We tumbled into the cold, damp grass outside, gasping for air. The cabin behind us crackled and howled as the flames consumed it. I turned back, watching as Ruth's silhouette slowly disappeared behind the flames. She didn't chase us. She didn't have to. Because she had sent a message. "They're not going to stop, are they?" I whispered. Carol shook her head, her face pale and streaked with soot. "They'll burn down everything to keep this secret." I looked at the black box, now charred at the edges but still intact. "What's inside this is worth more to them than our lives." Carol's expression darkened. "Then we need to find out why." The flames faded behind us as we ran through the dense woods. Carol suddenly stopped, grabbing my shoulder. "This way." We followed a narrow, hidden path until the trees opened up to reveal a crumbling stone church, long abandoned. Its wooden doors hung crookedly, and ivy crawled up the stone walls. "What is this place?" I asked, catching my breath. Carol's eyes glinted. "It's older than the house. Older than the family. Helen never dared to step foot here." "Why not?" She hesitated. "Because this is where the cycle was meant to be broken." Her words sent a chill through me. We pushed the doors open. Inside, the air was cold and heavy. Dust floated in beams of moonlight cutting through the broken stained glass. But the strangest thing was what was missing. No pews. No altar. Nothing. Just an empty stone floor. And a symbol carved into the stone. The same circle split by a jagged line as the one on the black box. "It's here," Carol whispered. "What is?" She crouched down, running her fingers along the symbol. "The roots." I set the black box on the symbol. For a moment nothing happened. Blick. The carvings on the floor glowed faintly, and the box slowly opened on its own. Inside was something we hadn't seen before. A small silver key, old but polished, lying atop a final unopened letter. Carol's breath caught in her throat. "That key, it's real." "Real for what?" She shook her head. "There's a door. Beneath the family estate. Helen always said it was sealed for a reason. I thought it was just a story." I stared at the key. "What's behind it?" Her eyes darkened. "The beginning. And the end." I slowly unfolded the last letter, its edges brittle with age. The handwriting was different this time. It wasn't Helen's. It was Abigail's. "If you've come this far, you've made the mistake I did. But listen closely. This key doesn't open a door. Opens a choice. Helen didn't create the cycle. She continued it. But it started long before her. And it must end with you. But be warned. The door does not open without cost. If you enter, you may not return. If you destroy it, you destroy us all." I stared at the words, feeling the weight of them settle over me. "Destroy us all," I whispered. Carol's eyes met mine. She meant the family. If we open that door, it could destroy everything Helen built. Or it could destroy us. I stared at the key in my hand. "So what do we do?" Carol's voice was barely a whisper. "We have two choices. We open the door and face whatever's behind it. Or we burn this key and walk away." I thought about the flames in the cabin. The way Ruth had watched us burn. Helen's cold, calculated smile. If we walk away, they'll never stop. Carol nodded slowly. Then we end it. Far away, in the shattered remains of the family estate, Helen stood in front of a mirror. But this wasn't an ordinary mirror. Its surface shimmered. And within it she watched us. They've found the key. Ruth stood silently beside her. Shall we stop them? Helen's reflection smiled faintly. No. Her fingers traced the glass. Let them open the door. Let them see the truth. He turned away. Because once they do, they'll never be able to close it again. They say some doors are never meant to be opened. But what if leaving it closed means the nightmare never ends? The key in my hand felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried. Not because of its weight, but because of what it could unlock. A truth so dark, even Helen feared it. And yet here I was, standing on the edge of something I couldn't turn back from. The family estate loomed in the distance, its silhouette bathed in the pale glow of the moon. The once proud house now looked like a rotting carcass, decaying under its own secrets. I stared at it from the tree-lean, gripping the silver key tightly. Carol stood beside me, her breath visible in the cold night air. "We're really doing this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded slowly. "We can't run forever. If there's a way to end this, it's behind that door." Carol swallowed hard. "Helen won't make this easy. She doesn't need to. She thinks she's already won." We moved silently, sticking to the shadows. The estate was unnervingly quiet. No torches, no voices, nothing. It was like they were waiting. We slipped through a side entrance, the wooden door creaking softly. Inside, the house was cold, the air thick with dust and rot. Every step we took felt deafening in the stillness. But Carol knew the way. She led me through the winding hallways, past rooms draped in white sheets, down creaking staircases. Finally we reached the basement. But it wasn't just a basement. The stone walls were older than the house itself. At the far end, half hidden by shadows, stood a large iron door, cold and unyielding. A jagged line split through the center of a carved circle on its surface, the same symbol as the one on the key. "This is it," Carol whispered. My hands trembled as I slid the key into the rusted lock. It resisted at first, then clicked with a heavy, grinding sound. The door groaned open, releasing a breath of air so cold it stole mine away. Beyond it was only darkness. "Stay close," I muttered. And we stepped inside. The passage led us deeper underground, the walls narrowing and the air growing colder. Our footsteps echoed in the dark, bouncing off walls that felt too close. Then the tunnel opened into a massive underground hall. Candles, still burning, lined the walls. But the flames didn't flicker. It was as if the air itself was frozen. On the walls hung portraits. Generations of women. Helen, Ruth, Lydia, Abigail, and countless others I didn't recognize. But none of the men in our family were here. "Where are the men?" I whispered. Carol's face darkened. "They don't matter here. They never did." At the far end of the hall stood a pedestal, and on it a book, bound in dark leather, with the family symbol etched into its cover. "This must be it," I said, moving toward it. Carol grabbed my arm. "Be careful. Helen wouldn't leave this unguarded." But curiosity burned hotter than caution. Opened the book. And what I saw made my blood run cold. Records. Every relationship. Every betrayal. Every manipulation. It was all written here. But what struck me most was one name over and over. Abigail. Her entries were longer, Messier. Her words bordered on madness. The bond must continue. Blood must mix to stay pure. We are the guardians of power. "Oh my God." "Breathe." Carol leaned over, her face pale. They weren't just protecting secrets. They were creating them. Oh. They were creating us. A cold wind swept through the hall, extinguishing the candles one by one. We spun around, the room plunging into near darkness. Then a slow, deliberate clap echoed through the space. Helen emerged from the shadows, a faint smile on her lips. You've come so far, Elena. I'm impressed. Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned with something far more dangerous. But you shouldn't have come here. Carol stepped forward, shielding me. It's over, Helen. We know everything. Helen laughed softly. Oh, you know nothing. You think that book holds the truth. It's a history, not a future. She took a step closer. You don't understand, Elena. This is your destiny. Our destiny. No, I snapped. Not anymore. Helen's smile faded. Then you've made your choice. She raised her hand. From the shadows, figures began to emerge. Ruth. And others. All of them standing between us and the way out. You opened the door, Elena. Helen's voice was barely a whisper. Now you must step through it. Helen gestured to the book. Take it. Continue the cycle. Or burn it and burn with it. My heart pounded. Was this a trap? Or a choice? What happens if I destroy it? I demanded. Helen tilted her head. Then everything ends. The legacy. Family. I looked at Carol. Her eyes pleaded with me. Don't let her win. Helen's voice slithered through the air. But if you do, what's left for you, Elena? No family. No power. Nothing. I stared at the book. The walls seemed to close in. This was it. The moment everything would change. Every family has its secrets. But some secrets are meant to be broken. Now I stood between two paths. One would bind me to the darkness that had cursed this family for generations. The other would burn everything to ash, including myself. And Helen knew it. She was counting on it. The cold silence stretched between us, heavier than the stone walls surrounding me. Helen's eyes bore into mine, cold and calculating. Her hand gestured toward the ancient family book resting on the pedestal. Take it, Elena, she purred. You are blood. This legacy is yours to carry. But her calm tone was a mask. Behind it I could feel the urgency. The fear. She wasn't offering me power. She was daring me to destroy it. What happens if I burn it? I asked, my voice shaking but firm. Helen's smile didn't falter. Then you burn with it. The figures behind her, Ruth, Margaret and others, stood still, their faces expressionless. Watching. Waiting. They wouldn't move unless Helen commanded. This was my moment. My decision. I looked at Carol, her face pale but determined. Do it, she whispered. End this. My hands trembled as I reached for the book. Its leather cover was cold, almost damp with age. As I opened it, the pages crackled, brittle and yellowed. I skimmed through the entries. Names, dates, and detailed records of manipulation. Of betrayal. My grandmother. My mother. Abigail. And now me. There was already a space waiting for my name. You were always meant to join us, Helen murmured, stepping closer. Her voice softened, almost maternal. You don't have to fight anymore. This is family. Clenched my jaw. Family doesn't do this. But part of me hesitated. If I destroyed the book, would it destroy me too? Was I willing to pay that price? What happens to me if I end it? I demanded. Helen's smile thinned. You cease to be. Just like Abigail. Her words hung in the air. Was that a threat? Or a promise? I tightened my grip on the book. Then let's find out. In one swift motion, I pulled a lighter from my pocket. The small flame flickered weakly in the cold air. Helen's face didn't change, but I saw the flicker of tension in her eyes. Think carefully, Elena, she warned. Once you start this, you can't stop. The dry pages caught fire instantly, the flames licking upward, devouring the words of generations. A horrible guttural scream echoed through the hall. But it wasn't Helen. It wasn't anyone in the room. Came from the walls. The very foundation of the estate seemed to groan in agony. Cracks spiderwebbed across the stone floor. The portraits on the walls began to blacken, the painted eyes of my ancestors melting into darkness. What have you done? Helen's voice twisted into a snarl. For the first time her composure cracked. You fool! You've doomed us all. The ground shook violently. The walls trembled as dust and stone rained down. But the fire didn't spread. It burned only the book, contained yet all-consuming. From within the flames, whispers began to rise. Voices layered over one another, crying out in anguish. Abigail! Her name cut through the noise, sharp and clear. Carol's eyes widened. She's here. The flames burst upward in a violent column of fire, and from it a figure emerged. Not flesh and blood, a shadow scorched and broken. Abigail. Her form flickered like smoke, but her eyes were locked on Helen. You couldn't silence me forever. Helen stumbled backward, her face pale. Oh. No, this isn't possible. Abigail's voice echoed through the hall. The cycle ends now. The stone pillars groaned and cracked, chunks of the ceiling crashing down. The entire hall was coming apart. We need to leave, Carol screamed, grabbing my arm. But Helen didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on Abigail, consumed by something between rage and terror. You think this ends with me? Helen spat. It's bigger than us. Bigger than all of you. Abigail's shadow advanced. Not anymore. The ground split beneath Helen's feet. She didn't scream. She simply fell, swallowed by the darkness. And then the fire was gone. The book was gone. But the house was crumbling. Run! Carol shouted. We sprinted back through the collapsing hall, dodging falling debris. The exit was barely visible through the dust and smoke. But we didn't stop. Not until we burst through the front doors and into the cold night air. Behind us, the estate groaned and collapsed in on itself, consumed by the very secrets it once protected. We stood on the hill, watching the ruins smolder in the early morning light. The family estate was gone, reduced to rubble and ash. For the first time in days, the air felt lighter. Free. Carol's voice broke the silence. It's over. But I wasn't so sure. Because in the distance, where the shadows of the forest met the rising sun, a figure stood. Watching. Not Helen. Not Ruth. But someone else. Their face hidden, unmoving. And then they turned and vanished into the trees. My stomach turned. It's not over, I whispered. Carol followed my gaze, her expression darkening. Then we'll be ready. I thought it was over. The house was gone. The book was gone. Helen was gone. But the past doesn't burn so easily. Because as the ashes settled, I saw something in the distance. Shadow. Watching. Waiting. The cycle wasn't broken. Not yet. The morning air was sharp against my skin. I stood among the ruins of the family estate, the smoldering rubble still warm beneath my boots. The once mighty house was now nothing more than collapsed walls and smoking beams. Should have felt like victory. But it didn't. Because in the distance, just beyond the tree-line, I had seen someone. Figure. Watching us. Carol noticed my unease. What is it? She asked, brushing soot from her jacket. We're not alone. Her eyes followed my gaze to the woods, narrowing. But the figure was gone. Helen is dead. Ruth is gone. Who else could it be? I shook my head slowly. Helen wasn't working alone. She never was. Carol's face darkened. You think there's more? There's always more. We left the ruins behind, following the faint, trampled path into the forest where I had seen the figure. The woods were unnaturally quiet. Not a single bird or rustling leaf. As if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Where are we going? Carol whispered. Wherever they are. We moved carefully, the soft crunch of dead leaves beneath us the only sound. Then Carol suddenly stopped, crouching down. Footprints, she murmured. The prints were fresh, heavy, leading deeper into the woods. But they weren't alone. Smaller prints followed beside them. 2 people. Guessed. Carol nodded. Or something worse. The trail led us to a small, crumbling mausoleum, half swallowed by vines and earth. Its stone doors were slightly ajar, the darkness within yawning open like a mouth. The family symbol, A circle split by a jagged line was carved into the stone above the entrance. Another one, I muttered, bile rising in my throat. Carol's voice was grim. The family didn't just build the estate. They built this too. For those who couldn't be buried with the rest. Why not? Her eyes met mine. Because some were too dangerous to rest. I gripped the cold stone door and pushed it open. The air that spilled out was stale and heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something fouler. We stepped inside. The inside of the mausoleum was colder than the forest. Stone coffins lined the walls, each engraved with names. But these weren't names I recognized. Not Helen. Not Ruth. Others. Who are they? I asked, running my fingers over the worn carvings. Carol's voice dropped to a whisper. The ones who tried to stop it. I turned sharply. What do you mean? She pointed to one of the coffins. The name was barely legible. Abigail. But it wasn't my great-aunt Abigail. It was older. Much older. They've done this before, Elena. Carol's words sank into me like ice. Generations have tried to end this. And every time it starts again. A shiver ran through me. Then what makes us any different? Carol hesitated. We're still alive. The air shifted. Somewhere deeper in the mausoleum, something moved. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoed off the stone walls. We weren't alone. Carol pulled me behind one of the stone coffins, her breath shallow. The footsteps grew louder. Closer. Then a voice. Will. You think burning the house would end it? I held my breath. The voice was unfamiliar, but it carried the same cold confidence Helen had. It was never about the house. A figure emerged from the shadows. Man. Tall, thin, draped in a dark, tattered cloak. His face was pale, but his eyes burned with intensity. Helen was only a gatekeeper. I am the door. Carol's grip on my arm tightened. We need to go, she whispered. But it was too late. He turned directly toward us. Don't run. You've already opened it. The man stepped closer, and I could see the symbol carved into his palm. The same family symbol. Who are you? I demanded. He smiled thinly. Family. Oh, that's not possible. Oh, but it is. He raised his hand, revealing a key. An exact replica of the one I had used to open the door beneath the estate. Helen was a distraction. The real legacy. It belongs to me now. What do you want? His eyes glinted. To finish what she started. But you've made it much easier. How? His grin widened. By waking them up. The walls of the mausoleum began to tremble. Hairline cracks snaked across the stone coffins. From within I heard it. Scratching. Low. Steady. Then something far worse. Hand. Bill. Clawing at the stone lid. Run. Carol screamed. But the man didn't move. He simply watched as the coffins began to open. You ended one cycle, Elena. His voice was ice. But now another begins. I thought destroying the house would end it. I thought burning the book would cut the roots. But the darkness wasn't tied to walls or pages. It was buried deeper. In blood. In flesh. And now it was waking up. The walls of the mausoleum groaned. Ancient stone shifting as if breathing. The air thickened, heavy with decay and dust. The coffins that lined the walls began to tremble, thin cracks crawling across their surfaces. The sound of scratching grew louder, more frantic. We need to go, Carol hissed, her grip tightening on my arm. But my legs wouldn't move. I was frozen, staring at the pale, clawed hand pushing through the cracked stone lid of the nearest coffin. It wasn't supposed to be like this. The book was gone. Helen was dead. Why wasn't it over? Elena. Carol yanked me backward. But the man in the cloak, the one who called himself family, just stood there smiling. You think you broke the cycle, he said softly. But you only tore it open. The stone lid of the coffin slid open with a gut-wrenching scrape. And from the darkness within, something began to crawl out. What emerged wasn't fully human. Not anymore. Its skin was pale and stretched thin, its eyes sunken but burning with recognition. It was her. Abigail. Or what was left of her. Her skeletal fingers gripped the edge of the coffin as she slowly pulled herself up, bones creaking. But she wasn't alone. The other coffins were opening now. One by one. Hands, faces, eyes that should have stayed closed. They were supposed to be gone, Carol whispered, her voice breaking. The cloaked man tilted his head, watching the scene with quiet amusement. Gone, he echoed. Oh. They were waiting. Abigail's cracked lips moved, but no sound came out. Until she turned her hollow eyes toward me. And spoke. You shouldn't have burned it. Her voice was like dry leaves, fragile but piercing. We freed you, I stammered. Her head tilted. Freed. Oh. You severed the roots, but the branches remain. The cloaked man's chuckle echoed. Helen was only pruning the tree, Elena. You set it on fire. And now it grows wild. What do you want from me? His smile was cold. It's not about what I want. It's about what's owed. Behind him, more figures were rising from the coffins. Women. Generations of the family. All twisted. All watching. They want their place back. Carol pulled me toward the entrance. We need to leave. But the stone door slammed shut on its own, sealing us inside. No. Carol threw herself against it, pounding with her fists. The cloaked man stepped closer. There is no leaving now. He lifted his hand. In his palm a second key identical to mine. Helen was guarding the door. I am the one who opens it. The stone beneath us began to crack, forming a circle that split in two, just like the family symbol. From the gap, a faint, sickly green light seeped upward. This is where it began, he whispered. And this is where it begins again. The rising figures began to chant. Low, guttural sounds that vibrated through the walls. The cracks in the ground widened, forming a deep chasm beneath the mausoleum. From within I could see movement. Something massive. Coiling. Alive. What is that? Gasped. The cloaked man's eyes gleamed. The heart of the family. The true root. Carol backed away, shaking her head. Oh. Just a story. It was always a story. But the ground trembled, splitting further. The air grew heavier. Utter. This isn't just about power, Elena. His voice was soft but cutting. It's about survival. We keep the bloodline pure so it can feed this. The writhing shape below shifted again, and the stone cracked further. Could see it now. Not branches. Roots. Twisting. Reaching. Hungry. You have a choice, the man said. He held out the second key. Take it. Seal the door. Restore the family. He gestured to the widening abyss. Let it consume us all. Carol stepped forward, her eyes burning. Don't listen to him, Elena. It's manipulation. It always has been. But the man's words slithered into my mind. You've already opened the door. You've already begun. The chanting grew louder, shaking the walls. If you walk away now, this darkness will follow you forever. I stared at the key, the chasm, at the crawling figures of my ancestors, chanting for me to decide. What if I destroy it? Yes. The man's smile faded. Then you destroy yourself. My grip tightened. Maybe that's exactly what needs to happen. I lunged forward. Not for the key. For the man. Caught off guard, he stumbled back toward the chasm. The chanting faltered. Carol screamed. I didn't stop. I shoved him hard, sending him over the edge. His scream echoed, swallowed by the darkness. But the ground didn't stop shaking. The roots didn't stop moving. We have to end it, shouted. I grabbed the key from where it had fallen. But instead of sealing the door, I threw it into the abyss. The chasm roared in response, the roots writhing violently. What did you do? Carol gasped. I turned to her, breath ragged. I made sure it can't be sealed again. The mausoleum began to collapse. Stone fell from the ceiling. Run. We sprinted toward the sealed door. But this time it cracked open on its own. The mausoleum groaned and buckled behind us as we burst into the cold night. We collapsed onto the forest floor, gasping for air. The mausoleum behind us was gone, swallowed by the earth. Carol turned to me, shaking. "Is it over?" I didn't answer, because in the silence I heard it. A whisper. From the ground beneath us. "Not yet." We thought we had ended it. The house was gone. The book was gone. Helen was gone. But evil doesn't need a home. It lives in blood. And our blood was still cursed. The forest was unnervingly silent, save for the crackling of dying embers behind us. The mausoleum was gone, swallowed whole by the earth. But even with the silence, I could still hear it. A faint, haunting whisper beneath the ground. "Not yet." Those two words echoed in my mind. I turned to Carol, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath. Her eyes darted nervously toward the ruins. "Do you hear it too?" "Yes." She didn't answer. But I could see it on her face. The fear. The realization. It wasn't over. "What was that man?" she finally whispered. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Family." The cold morning air bit at our skin as we slowly approached the edge of the ruins. Ashes swirled in the wind, dancing over the blackened remains of the family estate. Everything was reduced to rubble, except for one thing. A door half buried in the debris. Unburnt. Untouched. Its surface was smooth, carved with the split circle symbol. "It survived," Carol murmured. I knelt beside it, brushing away ash and soot. There was no handle, no lock, just the symbol pulsing faintly. "It wasn't meant to burn," I whispered. Carol crouched next to me. "Another door." I shook my head. "Oh, luck. And we're missing the key." Suddenly the wind shifted. Cold and sharp, like a whisper against my ear. "You already have it." Froze. "Did you hear that?" I turned to Carol. She shook her head slowly, fear widening her eyes. But the voice wasn't hers. It was Abigail's. Soft, distant, yet impossibly close. "The blood is the key." My gaze dropped to my hands. Blood. Dried and cracked from the earlier fight. The realization hit me like a hammer. "It's not a key we need." I pulled out the shard of the burned book cover I had pocketed before fleeing. The family symbol glowed faintly on its surface. "It's us." Without another word, I dragged the jagged edge of the book shard across my palm. A thin line of blood welled up. The door pulsed softly in response. Carol recoiled. "Elena, don't." But it was too late. I pressed my bleeding hand against the symbol. The door shuddered. Cracks splintered across its surface, revealing a dark void beneath. Slowly the door opened. A cold wind howled from below, carrying the scent of damp earth and something fouler. "We're not supposed to be here," Carol whispered, backing away. "Neither were they," I muttered, stepping forward. A narrow stone staircase spiraled downward into suffocating darkness. Faintly glowing symbols lined the walls, pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. Each step felt heavier, the air thicker. The further we descended, the colder it became. Carol's breath came in shaky puffs. "What is this place?" My voice was hollow. "The beginning." We reached the bottom. An enormous underground chamber stretched before us. At its center stood a stone altar, covered in ancient symbols. Surrounding it were statues, faceless, robed figures. But their hands were carved with the family symbol. And in the center of the altar, embedded deep, was something that didn't belong. Mirror. Cracked, but glowing faintly. I moved closer, the mirror pulling me in. But it didn't reflect me. Not entirely. In the reflection I saw Helen, standing over the same altar. But she wasn't alone. My mother was there too. And Grandma Lydia, performing some kind of ritual. Blood pooling on the altar. But the most disturbing part, they weren't chanting alone. More figures. Generations of family members. All alive in the mirror, but long dead in reality. "They've done this before," I whispered. Carol's voice trembled. "And they're waiting for you to finish it." A soft, familiar voice echoed through the chamber. Curiosity is a dangerous thing, Elena. I turned sharply. But no one was there. Only the mirror. And in it Helen. Alive. Smiling. Did you really think it was over? Her reflection moved, though the glass didn't ripple. The family's legacy isn't bound to flesh and bone. It's bound to the bloodline. Her eyes burned into mine. And you've already opened the door. The mirror cracked further, the glow intensifying. Finish it, Elena. Or let it consume you. The ground trembled beneath our feet. The statues around us began to shift, stone fingers twitching. Carol grabbed my arm. We need to go. But I couldn't move. Because deep beneath the stone I felt it. Pulse. Like a heartbeat. Low. Heavy. Alive. It's waking up. The mirror pulsed once more, brighter now. And for the briefest second I saw myself. But not as I was. Something else. Elena, run. They say when you stare into the abyss it stares back. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes the abyss whispers. And sometimes it whispers with your own voice. The mirror on the stone altar cracked deeper. Thin fractures creeping across the glass like veins. That haunting glow pulsed. Slow, steady like a heartbeat. I couldn't look away. Because it wasn't Helen staring back anymore. It was me. But not me. Her eyes were darker, hollow, as if something ancient had filled them. And then, she smiled. You've already started, Elena. The reflection's lips moved, perfectly in sync with the words that weren't mine. There's no going back now. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. Whoa. No, this isn't real. The ground trembled beneath us, dust falling from the cracked ceiling. Carol gripped my arm tightly. Elena, we need to leave. But I couldn't move. 'Cause deep down, I wasn't sure if we could. The statues surrounding the altar shifted. Their stone heads turned, slowly, deliberately. The faceless figures loomed taller now, casting long, jagged shadows across the walls. And in the silence, a low groan vibrated through the chamber. Not from the walls, from them. One of the statues raised an arm, its stone fingers splintering into long, jagged claws. Another took a slow, grinding step forward. They're not statues, Carol whispered in horror. They're waiting for me to finish, I murmured. Or stop you, Carol snapped. A deep, bone-chilling voice echoed around us. You cannot leave without finishing what was begun. The statues closed in. Run! I shouted, grabbing Carol's hand. We darted toward the far end of the chamber, where the wall cracked slightly open. A narrow, dark passageway barely visible. We squeezed through just as the stone guardians lunged, their jagged claws slashing through the air. The passage was suffocating, the walls so close they scraped our shoulders. But it was better than the death waiting behind us. Where does this lead? Carol gasped between breaths. I shook my head. Anywhere but here. But the air grew colder, heavier, and the whispering followed us, soft at first, then louder, and louder. Elena, finish it. Come back. The walls seemed to breathe with the voices. They're inside the walls, Carol whispered. No. I looked ahead into the choking darkness. They're inside us. The passage opened into a small, circular room. The walls were covered in names, carved deep into the stone. Generations of them. Some names I knew. Helen, Ruth, Lydia. But others, names I had never heard. What is this place? Carol asked. I traced a finger over one of the carvings. A record of everyone who's ever been part of this. I stepped closer, and then I saw it. The very bottom. Name. Elena. Freshly carved. As if waiting to be filled. Carol's breath caught. They already knew you'd be here. My hand trembled as I reached out, but I stopped. Because beneath my name, another was starting to appear. Not carved. Written in blood. Carol. Her eyes widened. Whoa. No, this isn't possible. But the blood dripped slowly, as if the stone itself was bleeding. It's not about me anymore, I whispered. They want you too. The air shifted again. The coldness deepened. And Helen's voice slithered from the walls. It was never just you, Elena. I spun around, searching the shadows. Show yourself. A soft, hollow laugh echoed. I don't need to. You've already let me in. The walls began to bleed faster, the names dripping into each other, blurring, disappearing, until only two remained. Elena. Pearl. Finish it. Helen's voice was a command now. But it wasn't just Helen anymore. It was all of them. Generations of voices layered into one. Finish it, or become it. In the center of the room, something began to rise from the stone. Door. Smaller than the first. Carved entirely from bone. No handle. No lock. But a faint glow pulsed beneath it. Carol's voice trembled. What is that? I stared at it, heart pounding. A choice. Slowly words burned into the bone. Sacrifice. And beneath it, submission. Upat. Neither safe, neither clear. Carol grabbed my shoulder. We can't keep going, Elena. This has to stop. I stared at the door. The two words. But how? Carol's grip tightened. We choose. Or they choose for us. The whispers grew louder, clawing at my mind. Finish it, or become it. I took a shaky breath, and placed my hand on the door. Some doors should never be opened. But what happens when every door leads to darkness? When every choice is a trap? And when the family you trusted was the one that locked you inside? The bone door pulsed faintly under my palm. Two words, burned into its surface, seemed to breathe with life. Sacrifice. Submission. Carol's voice cracked behind me. Elena, please. I didn't look back. My eyes were fixed on those words. Voice. But not a fair one. What do they mean? Carol demanded, her breath shaky. Sacrifice, I whispered, my voice barely audible, means giving up something. Maybe someone to stop this. My hand trembled as I traced the second word. Submission. Means becoming part of it. No. Carol's voice was sharp, filled with fear. There's no way we're part of this. We're nothing like them. But the whispers creeping through the cracks of the walls told me otherwise. You are family. My mind spun back to Helen. Her cold eyes. Her warnings. The bloodline must continue. And my mother. The lies she lived. The secret she hid. I clenched my fists. This ends now. But the whispers only grew louder. Choose. 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 Or it will be chosen for you. A sudden surge of anger flooded me. No. I wasn't going to play their game. I raised the shard of the book cover I still had and slammed it against the door. The bone cracked slightly but didn't break. Elena, stop. Carol screamed. I struck it again. And again. The cracks spread, thin as spiderwebs. But from those cracks, blood began to seep. Dark. Endless. It dripped down the door, pooling at my feet. What is this? I stammered, stepping back. Carol's voice was barely a whisper. It's not a door, Elena. I turned to her, breath ragged. Then what is it? Her eyes were wide, filled with horror. It's a body. The door shuddered. The cracks widened. And then moved. Splitting apart slowly, revealing something beyond comprehension. Not a hallway. Not a room. But flesh. Veins. Pulsing. Life. A massive, beating heart, embedded in the walls of this underground nightmare. And faces. Twisting. Screaming. The faces of ancestors. Helen. Ruth. Even Grandma Lydia. All fused into the walls. Their mouths open in silent screams. It's alive, I breathed. The bone structure wasn't a door. It was a ribcage. And we were standing inside something ancient. Something alive. This is the family, I whispered. It was never just a legacy. It's a being. Carol stumbled back, covering her mouth. We have to get out of here. But the ground shook violently, and the walls began to close in. No escape, the voices whispered. Only choice. A figure began to emerge from the dark, pulsing walls. The cloaked man. The one who called himself family. But now his cloak was gone, revealing his form. His skin was stretched unnaturally tight, veins black and pulsing beneath. His face was hollow, eyes sunken but burning. "You shouldn't have come here," he hissed. "This isn't a place for living blood." I steadied myself, glaring at him. "Then why bring me here?" His lips twisted into a cruel smile. "Because it was always meant to be you." He pointed to the heart behind him. "You are the missing piece." I shook my head. "Oh, I destroyed the book. I ended it." He laughed, dry and bitter. "You ended nothing. You only freed it." He stepped closer. "The book wasn't a curse. It was a lock. And now the door is wide open." The walls began to pulse, faster and faster. The heart beating wildly. The blood must return to the source. "No." I backed away, but Carol was frozen in place, staring at something behind me. "Elena." Her voice trembled. Turned slowly, and saw it. My own reflection in the pulsing wall. But it wasn't me. It was the version of me I saw in the mirror. Dark, twisted, smiling. "You know what must be done." The cloaked man raised his arms. "Choose. Sacrifice. Or submission." Carol grabbed my hand. "There has to be another way." I stared at the heart, at the pulsing walls, and at my dark reflection. And I realized something. There was a third choice. One they didn't expect. I stepped forward slowly. Toward the heart. The cloaked man's grin widened. "Yes, embrace it." But I wasn't going to embrace it. I was going to end it. "Elena, what are you doing?" Carol screamed. I turned to her. "Trust me." And with everything I had, I drove the shard of the book into the beating heart. The chamber let out a deafening scream. Not from any mouth. From the walls. The ground split open. The walls began to crumble, black blood gushing from every crack. The cloaked man shrieked. His body splintering and collapsing into ash. Faces on the walls screamed silently as they dissolved. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Carol. We ran as the entire underground labyrinth crumbled around us. Stone and bone shattered, the very ground caving in. And then, like blinding light, we burst into the open forest, collapsing onto the cold ground. Behind us, the earth caved in, swallowing everything. And then, silence. We lay there gasping. Carol slowly turned to me. "Is it over?" I stared at the sky. But something inside me shifted. No whispers, no shadows. But deep down I knew. For now, some things stay buried. Others crawl their way back to the surface. I thought I ended it. But the past has sharp teeth. And it's still biting. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a soft orange glow over the dense forest. I lay on the cold ground, chest heaving, the sharp scent of ash and damp earth filling my lungs. For a fleeting moment there was peace. No whispers, no shadows, just silence. But it wasn't comforting. It was the kind of silence that made you feel like you were being watched. Carol slowly sat up beside me, wiping the dirt from her face. "Did we do it?" she asked cautiously. I didn't answer right away. Because deep down I wasn't sure. "We stopped something," I finally whispered. "But I don't know if it was everything." Carol's gaze drifted toward the collapsed ground behind us, the spot where the bone chamber had crumbled into nothing. "Then why does it still feel like we're not alone?" Her words lingered in the air, heavy and sharp. The wind rustled through the trees, but it wasn't natural. It carried a faint, hollow whisper. Too soft to understand, but impossible to ignore. Carol's head snapped toward the sound. "Tell me you heard that." I nodded slowly. "It's not over." We rose to our feet, scanning the forest. But everything looked the same. Quiet. Ill. But wrong. "We need to keep moving," I said, my voice barely steady. But Carol didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on something ahead. "Elena." Her voice was barely a whisper. I followed her gaze. And my blood turned to ice. Standing between the trees, half shrouded in shadow, was Helen. No longer decayed, no longer screaming, just standing there, watching, smiling. Impossible, I breathed. But Helen simply tilted her head. You're still running, Elena. Her voice wasn't loud, but it slithered through the air. You think stabbing the heart ends the story? Her smile widened, cold and deliberate. It's not the heart that matters. It's the blood. I took a shaky step forward. You're supposed to be gone. Helen chuckled, a soft, haunting sound. Gone. You don't understand, do you? Her figure flickered slightly, like a flame in the wind. This isn't a curse you can burn away. It's a legacy. Carol grabbed my arm, pulling me back. She's not real. She's just trying to scare us. But I wasn't so sure. Helen's eyes glinted. You've opened doors that cannot be closed. And with that she simply vanished. No sound. No movement. Just gone. My breath came in shallow bursts. Carol was pacing, panic creeping into her voice. Elena, what do we do? We destroyed everything. What else is there? I didn't answer. 'Cause I felt it. A sharp sting on my palm. I looked down. The cut I had made to open the bone door. It wasn't healing. Instead, the wound was spreading. Black veins spiraled outward from the cut, creeping up my wrist. No, Carol noticed. Elena, your hand. I stumbled back, clutching my arm. It's in me. What? The bloodline. Didn't die. It moved. Carol's face went pale. Into you. I nodded slowly. It wasn't about the house. Or the book. It was about the blood. Carol's voice turned hard. Then we have to stop it. I met her eyes. Oh. I can't burn myself alive. She hesitated, swallowing hard. Not yet. Her words hung in the air. There has to be another way. I thought about the mirror. The reflection that wasn't me. The version of me that smiled when I was afraid. There's something else. Carol frowned. What are you talking about? That mirror. It wasn't just showing me. It was showing what I could become. I clenched my fists, ignoring the creeping black veins. If we can find it again, maybe we can trap this thing. Carol hesitated. Or it could trap you. Better me than the rest of the world. As we turned back toward the forest, a faint trail of blood led deeper between the trees. Fresh. Still warm. But it wasn't dripping. It was drawn. In patterns. Symbols. The family symbol. Over and over. They're guiding us, Carol muttered. Or baiting us. But we had no choice. We followed the trail. The forest grew darker. Quieter. And ahead, nestled in the roots of a dead tree, was a mirror. Cracked. Waiting. The same mirror from the chamber. But here. In the forest. No more running, I whispered. I stepped toward it. And in the reflection, Helen was standing behind me. They say mirrors reflect the truth. But what if the truth is something you're not ready to see? What if the reflection staring back isn't you at all? The forest seemed to hold its breath. Nestled in the twisted roots of a decaying tree was the cracked mirror. Its jagged surface shimmered faintly, reflecting more than just the forest around us. It reflected Helen, standing behind me. But when I turned, there was nothing. Only Carol, eyes wide, staring at the mirror. Did you see that? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Carol slowly nodded, her face pale. She's inside it. I stepped closer, heart pounding. But the mirror didn't reflect me. It reflected something else. A version of me. Standing tall, cold, eyes dark and empty. And smiling. What is this? Carol's voice trembled. I couldn't answer. 'Cause I heard it. A faint whisper rising from the mirror. Not from Helen. From me. Let me in. The reflection tilted its head, that cold smile widening. I can end this. I stumbled back. Whoa. You're not me. But the reflection only laughed softly. Aren't I? The mirror pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. And for a moment, I wasn't sure if the sound was coming from the glass or my own chest. This is how they win, Carol said urgently. It's a trick. But deep down, a part of me wasn't so sure. Because the darkness spreading in my veins pulsed in rhythm with the mirror's glow. I raised a trembling hand toward the glass. Elena, don't. Carol's voice cracked. But I couldn't stop. My fingers grazed the cold, fractured surface. And the mirror shivered. A ripple of darkness spread from where I touched it. The reflection's smile widened. That's it, let me in. Pain exploded in my chest. I gasped, clutching my ribs. The black veins on my arm spread rapidly, crawling up my neck. Elena. Carol rushed forward, trying to pull me back. But the mirror's surface turned liquid, pulling at me, dragging me in. No! I fought it, but it was like drowning in ice. Cold, endless, and then, darkness. I opened my eyes. But I wasn't in the forest anymore. I was standing in a place that looked like it. But it wasn't. The trees were twisted, their branches clawing at a blood-red sky. The ground was cracked, bleeding shadows instead of soil. And everywhere mirrors, hanging from the trees, embedded in the ground, reflecting nothing but darkness. And in every mirror, the twisted version of me, watching, smiling. "Welcome home," she whispered, her voice echoing from every reflection. I spun around, heart racing. "Where am I?" "Where you belong," the reflection purred. One mirror cracked, then another. And through the fractures, hands began to emerge. Clawing, dragging themselves forward. Helen, Ruth, Lydia, all of them. But twisted. Their skin splitting into shards of glass, their eyes hollow and gleaming. "We are family. We are you." The mirrors closed in. "No!" I screamed. I turned, searching for any way out. But every path was lined with mirrors. And every reflection was me. But not me. Not anymore. The main reflection stepped forward. The one that looked exactly like me. But stronger. Colder. "You can't escape." She reached out a hand. "But you can choose." I stared at her, breathing hard. "Choose what?" Her eyes gleamed. "To end this." She gestured to the darkened world. "Break the mirrors. Shatter the past. And this all ends." I hesitated. Could it really be that simple? Or, she continued, "You can wake up and let it all begin again." My mind spun. What if smashing the mirrors really did end it? But what if it unleashed something worse? The mirrors vibrated, the reflections starting to scream. Their faces twisted in pain. "Do it," the reflection hissed. "Or stay here forever." I looked down. In my hand was the shard from the book cover. Still sharp. Still burning faintly. Carol's voice echoed faintly in my mind. "It's a trick." I raised the shard. My reflection watched, unblinking. Waiting. I took a shaky breath. And instead of smashing the mirror, I stabbed my own reflection. The glass didn't crack. It exploded. A deafening roar of shattering mirrors filled the air. The reflections screamed, dissolving into dust. The world split apart, crumbling beneath me. And then, like blinding, searing light, I gasped, jolting upright. I was back in the forest. The mirror was gone. Carol was kneeling beside me, shaking me. "Elena, you're back." I coughed, my throat raw. "The mirrors, they're gone." Carol looked around. But the forest was still. Quiet. But not safe. "What did you do?" she asked, fear in her eyes. I looked at my hand. The black veins were fading. But not gone. I broke the reflection. But deep down I knew. Some cracks can't be fixed. And some reflections still watch from the shadows. I shattered the reflection. But some cracks don't heal. Some splinters dig deeper. And they never let go. The wind whispered softly through the trees, carrying the chill of early morning. I sat on the forest floor, my breath ragged, the cold air biting at my skin. The mirror was gone. But the forest didn't feel safe. Not really. Carol crouched beside me, her eyes scanning the shadows. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her hand hesitantly brushing my shoulder. I nodded slowly, but I wasn't sure if I meant it. It's over, I whispered. But the words felt hollow. Carol wasn't convinced either. It doesn't feel over. Neither of us moved for a moment. Then I looked down at my hand. The black veins that had crept up my arm were nearly gone. But not completely. A faint, dark web still pulsed beneath my skin. Low, steady, like a reminder. It's still here, I muttered. Carol's eyes followed my gaze, widening in fear. Elena, what if it's not finished with you? I met her eyes, the weight of everything crashing down on me. Or maybe, I'm not finished with it. We moved through the forest, the air growing colder with each step. The ruined estate loomed in the distance, reduced to a skeleton of charred beams and crumbled stone. It should have been gone, buried. But the land itself felt alive, breathing, waiting. Why are we here again? Carol asked, glancing nervously at the scorched ground. I hesitated. Because there's still something here. My eyes drifted to the ground, where the earth had cracked during the collapse. Thin trails of blackened roots twisted through the dirt, pulsing faintly. It's still growing, I whispered. Carol backed away. Whoa, we need to leave. Now. But I couldn't move. Because something in the ground called to me. A faint glimmer caught my eye. Buried in the rubble was another door. Smaller. Made of rusted iron, half swallowed by the earth. But it wasn't locked. No symbols. No seals. Just waiting. It was never about the house, I murmured. Carol stepped closer, hesitant. What is it? I knelt, brushing dirt away from the handle. A door they didn't want us to find. I hesitated, hand hovering over the handle. Every part of me screamed to walk away. But the blood in my veins pulled me forward. Elena, don't. Opened it. The air that rushed out was freezing damp with the scent of old stone and decay. We stepped carefully into a small, dark room. The walls were lined with portraits. Faces of family members long dead. But their eyes, they watched. Every painting, every face, watching. In the center of the room sat a single chair. And on it, a journal. Its cover worn, the pages yellowed. But the family symbol was etched into the leather. It's another book, Carol whispered. I shook my head. Not just any book. I reached for it, my fingers brushing the cover. It was warm, alive. And when I opened it, I saw the first page. Name. Written over and over again. Elena. Carol's voice trembled. I turned the page. Carol's name. The ink was fresh. Still wet. They knew we'd come here, I murmured. And then I saw it. At the bottom of the page, written in that same inky black. The cycle must continue. I dropped the book, stumbling back. But the pages began to turn on their own, faster and faster, whipping in the still air. Until it stopped. On a blank page. Slowly, as if an invisible hand was writing, words appeared. The heart must beat again. The ground trembled beneath us. Elena, we have to go, Carol yelled. But the walls began to shift. Portraits. Faces. They started to melt. Their eyes turning black, mouths curling into wicked smiles. It's starting again, I whispered. A loud crack echoed as the ground split open. From the darkness below, roots, thicker, blacker, began to crawl into the room. Moving. Reaching. Run. Carol screamed. But I was frozen. Because the roots weren't just growing. They were forming something. Figure. Rising from the earth. Twisted. Face. Hollow. Me. Smiling. The heart must beat again, it whispered in my own voice. The figure raised a hand. And the roots lunged. Carol yanked me backward, and we sprinted toward the door. The roots screamed, slamming into the walls as we barely escaped, slamming the iron door shut behind us. We collapsed on the ground, gasping. But even now, I could feel it. The faint pulse beneath the earth. Steady. Growing. It's not over, I whispered. Carol didn't argue. 'Cause we both knew. Whatever I thought I ended was just beginning again. And this time, it wasn't waiting to be found. It was coming for us. Some secrets aren't meant to stay buried. They twist. They grow. And when they rise, they don't come back alone. The cold air gnawed at my skin as I collapsed beside Carol, both of us gasping for breath. The iron door behind us was shut, but it felt fragile, as if it couldn't hold back what we'd just seen. Elena, what was that? Carol's voice was barely above a whisper, her hands shaking. I stared at the ground, feeling the faint pulse beneath it. Low, deliberate, a beat that wasn't ours. It's me, I said quietly. Carol's head snapped toward me. What are you talking about? I clenched my fists. That thing, it wasn't just mimicking me. It is me. Or it's what I'll become if this doesn't stop. Carol's face paled. Then how do we stop it? I didn't have an answer. But deep down I knew the truth. We might already be too late. The wind picked up, carrying with it the sharp scent of earth and something far worse. Carol stood, scanning the treeline. Something's wrong, she muttered. And then we saw it. The trees were bleeding. Dark, viscous liquid seeped from the bark, oozing down in slow, deliberate trails. The forest groaned, as if the roots beneath were shifting. It's spreading, I whispered. The pulse beneath the ground grew heavier, matching the rhythm in my veins. We have to move, Carol said, grabbing my arm. But I didn't move, because something in the distance caught my eye. Figure. Standing still. Helen. Or what used to be Helen. Her skin was cracked, veins dark and pulsing. Her eyes glowed faintly. And behind her, more figures began to emerge. Family. Twisted and broken but walking. They're awake, I muttered. Helen's voice drifted through the air, soft and cruel. The blood remembers Elena. She took a slow step forward and the others followed. Ruth. Lydia. Even faces I didn't recognize, all bearing the same hollow, knowing stare. You thought you could cut the roots. Her smile was thin. But roots grow back. I stepped back, heart pounding. Carol pulled at me. We can't fight them. But Helen tilted her head. Oh, but you can join us. The pulse in my veins burned. Life. For a terrifying moment I wanted to step forward. To belong. But Carol's grip on my wrist snapped me back. Don't listen to her. Clenched my jaw. What do you want from me? I demanded. Helen smiled. The same thing we've always wanted. Continuation. She gestured to the ground. The heart must beat. Helen took another step forward. You can end this, Elena. All it takes is acceptance. She extended a hand. And in her palm. But it wasn't made of metal. It was bone. Twisted, dark, and pulsing. Take it, Helen urged. Unlock the final door. And all of this will be over. Carol shook her head violently. It's a trap. But Helen's smile never wavered. Or its freedom. I stared at the key. My hand twitched. The pulse in my veins matched its rhythm. What happens if I take it? Asked. Helen's eyes gleamed. Then the family will finally be whole again. I reached out. And stopped. 'Cause I saw something. Helen's reflection. Flickering. Cracking. A glass. You're not real, I whispered. Her smile faltered. What? You're not real, I repeated louder. None of this is. I turned to Carol. It's the mirror. We're still in it. The forest shimmered slightly. Trees. The blood. Helen. All just reflections. Trap. They never let us leave. Carol's eyes widened. Then how do we break it? I stared at the key. And I understood. We don't use it. Helen's face twisted in rage. No. I turned and threw the key into the ground, shattering it. The ground exploded in a burst of light. The forest cracked like broken glass. The sky split apart, revealing endless darkness beyond. Helen screamed, her form splintering into shards. The others dissolved, their faces twisting in silent rage. And then, silence. Blinding light swallowed everything. I gasped, collapsing to my knees. We were back. The forest was normal. No bleeding trees. No pulse. Just stillness. Carol dropped beside me. Did we do it? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. I nodded slowly. But something felt off. I looked at my hand. The black veins were gone. But in their place, faint scar. In the shape of the family symbol. As the wind rustled through the trees, I heard it. Distant. But clear. The heart will beat again. I froze, scanning the trees. But there was nothing. Carol placed a hand on my shoulder. Elena. It's over. He nodded. But deep down I wasn't sure. 'Cause some doors, even when shattered, never really stay closed. They say silence is peaceful. But sometimes silence is just the pause before the scream. I thought we had escaped. But some things are far too deep to run from. The forest was still. Too still. The only sound was the distant rustle of leaves, swaying in the cool breeze. I sat on the damp ground, the weight of exhaustion pressing on my chest. Carol was beside me, silent, her eyes staring ahead at nothing. We had made it out. But the stillness wasn't comforting. It was suffocating, like the world itself was holding its breath. It's over, Carol muttered, more to herself than to me. I wanted to believe her. But the faint sting in my palm said otherwise. I slowly uncurled my fingers. The scar on my palm, the twisted shape of the family symbol, burned faintly. Not with pain, but with a warning. No, I whispered. It's not. The path ahead led back to the ruins of the family estate. The once grand house was now nothing but a skeleton of charred beams and broken stone. But the air around it felt alive. Why are we going back? Carol's voice was tight with fear. I didn't answer right away. Because I wasn't sure myself. But something in me, something old, pulled me forward. There's something left here, I finally said. Carol hesitated. We destroyed the mirror. The book. Everything. I shook my head slowly. Oh. We destroyed what they let us find. The ground crunched beneath our feet, the ash and debris swallowing every sound. Then we saw it. A place where the ground had caved in, revealing something beneath the estate. Stone staircase. Descending into darkness. Of course, I muttered. Carol stared. Oh. Elena, we're not going down there. But I was already moving. 'Cause I knew. Whatever was left, it was waiting. The stone stairs seemed endless, spiraling deeper than the house itself could have allowed. The air grew colder with every step. But heavy. It shouldn't be this deep, Carol whispered, gripping my arm. I didn't respond. Because the walls were changing. They weren't stone anymore. They were roots. Black. Twisting. Moving. Slowly pulsing like veins under skin. And on them, symbols. The same family crest, burned into the bark. Over and over. It's alive, Carol muttered. He nodded. It always was. At the bottom of the stairs, the tunnel opened into a vast, circular chamber. At its center a pedestal stood. And on it, mirror. But not broken. Not cracked. Perfect. Untouched. Waiting. I approached slowly. My reflection stared back. But it wasn't me. Not the me standing there. It was the other me. The one I thought I destroyed. Her eyes were calm, but cold. And then she spoke. You've come so far. Just to start again. Carol gasped. Elena stepped back. But the mirror didn't move. Only the reflection did. You think you've won. But this family. It's in your blood. Her smile was slow. And blood always finds a way. I shook my head. Oh. I broke the cycle. Her laughter was soft. Did you? Then why are you here? The words cut deeper than I expected. Why was I here? Because something told me this wasn't over. Because the blood still burned beneath my skin. What do you want? I demanded. The reflection tilted its head. To show you the truth. The mirror rippled. And I was no longer looking at myself. I was looking at her. My mother. She stood in the mirror. Alive. Whole. But her eyes. They were like Helen's. Dark. Cold. Mom. My voice cracked. Her expression didn't change. You were never supposed to find this. What is this? She turned slowly, revealing another figure standing beside her. Grandma Lydia, smiling. It's where it all began. The image shifted. A house, but older, untouched by fire. And in it, my mother and Lydia, whispering together over the same mirror. We needed to protect you, my mother's voice echoed. By hiding the truth. Her eyes met mine. By preparing you. The mirror flashed. And suddenly I was staring at myself. But older. Sitting in that same house. Holding the mirror. No, I gasped. This isn't real. It's your future. The reflection smiled. Unless you change it. The mirror shimmered. 2 words appeared on its surface. Break. Become. Carol's voice was sharp. Elena, whatever this is, don't listen to it. But the air shifted. And I realized the mirror wasn't just showing me the past. It was offering me a choice. Break the mirror. End this. Or become part of it. It's your family, my mother's voice echoed. Your blood. My hand hovered over the glass. It was warm. Alive. Waiting. Choose. And as the mirror pulsed under my fingertips, I realized. No matter what I chose, something would break. They say every choice has a consequence. But what if both paths lead to ruin? What if breaking free means breaking yourself? And becoming what you fear is the only way to survive. The mirror pulsed beneath my fingertips, the air thick with electricity. 2 words burned on its surface. Break. Become. The voices of my mother and grandmother echoed faintly in the stone chamber. Choose, Elena, my mother's voice urged, soft but insistent. Beside me, Carol gripped my arm. Don't listen to them. We don't have to play their game. But the mirror's surface rippled again, and my reflection shifted. No longer me, but a version of me, older, colder, with eyes that had seen too much. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Only one word formed on her mouth. Become. A cold shiver crawled down my spine. Elena, please. Carol's voice cracked. But my hand wouldn't move. I was trapped. Not by the mirror. By the weight of this choice. What if breaking it doesn't end it? I whispered. Carol shook her head. And what if becoming it means losing yourself forever? The mirror seemed to hum, vibrating with anticipation. Choose. I tightened my grip around the shard of glass in my hand. Then I choose neither. And with every ounce of strength, I smashed the shard against the mirror. For a brief second the glass cracked. But instead of shattering, the mirror screamed. A shrill, inhuman wail that rattled the walls. The cracks on the glass pulsed and then began to heal. The mirror repaired itself, the surface becoming smooth once more. But something had changed. From the cracks seeped thin, black veins, crawling outward, latching onto the walls and floor. The room trembled. Elena, we need to go. Carol yanked at my arm. But the mirror wasn't done. Split in half. Not shattered. Open. Like a door. And beyond it, darkness. But not empty. Shapes moved within. Low. Deliberate. Touching. A cold wind howled from the open mirror, pulling at our clothes, our skin. But it wasn't wind. It was something deeper. They want us to go in, I murmured. Carol's grip tightened. Then we run the other way. But my feet wouldn't move. Because the pull wasn't from the mirror. It was from inside me. The black veins in my hand pulsed in rhythm with the darkness beyond. It's calling me. Carol's eyes filled with panic. Then don't answer. But it was too late. A voice drifted from the dark. Grandma Lydia's voice. Weep. Elena dear, come home. The ground beneath us cracked. Roots, thick and black, snaked out, wrapping around the room, blocking the exit. We were trapped. We have to go through. Carol shook her head. Oh. No, we'll find another way. But the roots tightened, walls closing in. We had no choice. And so I stepped forward. Crossing the mirror was like walking through ice. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I felt nothing. Dinner. But it was heavy. We stood in a vast garden, but it wasn't like anything I had seen before. The trees were dead, their branches tangled like claws. Flowers were made of flesh, petals soft and red, veins pulsing beneath their surface. And the ground breathed. "Where are we?" Carol whispered. I swallowed hard. The heart of it all. Ahead, a towering structure rose. A tree, blackened and hollow, its trunk split wide like a mouth. And inside, faint glowing lights flickered. Lanterns, each one holding a piece of bone. Bones engraved with names. Our family's names. They've built this place on us, I realized. On our blood. A figure stepped from the tree's hollow. Draped in a cloak of woven roots. Its face was hidden beneath a hood, but when it spoke, the air trembled. "You have come at last." The voice was neither male nor female. Simply was. "Who are you?" I demanded. It raised a gnarled hand, pointing to the lanterns. "The keeper. I tend to what remains." I took a step forward. "What do you want?" Its head tilted. "Not what I want. What you are owed." The ground trembled, and the lanterns flickered. The blood must be honored. The cloaked figure extended both hands. In one palm, a small glowing seed, pulsing with light. In the other, a blade black and jagged. "Plant it, and the roots will claim you. Spill it, and the bloodline ends." Carol stepped forward. "Don't take anything from it." But the choice was mine. Both options felt like poison. "Choose," the keeper hissed. And in the wind, I heard my mother's voice. "We only wanted to protect you." The seed pulsed in the keeper's hand. The blade gleamed. Neither felt right. But I had to choose. "Elena." Carol's voice was barely a whisper. The ground shifted beneath us. The roots began to move. Closer. Faster. Time was running out. If I planted the seed, I'd become part of this cursed legacy. If I used the blade, I might sever the family line forever. But what if neither was the answer? My grip tightened, and then I did the only thing that felt right. I reached out and grabbed both. Some choices are meant to be made. Others are meant to be traps. But when you take both roads, you don't escape the consequences. You double them. The air in the blood garden thickened, growing colder as the weight of my decision settled. In my left hand, the small glowing seed pulsed with a strange warmth. In my right, the jagged black blade seemed to hum, cold and heavy. The keeper, cloaked in roots, stood motionless before me. But though it didn't move, I could feel its eyes, or whatever lay beneath that hood, burning into me. "This was not the choice to make," it rasped, the voice colder now. "No one takes both." Beside me, Carol was frozen in shock. "Elena, what did you just do?" I didn't answer. Because I wasn't sure myself. All I knew was that neither path alone was right. So I made my own. But now the air shifted, the ground trembling under our feet. "You misunderstand the blood," the keeper hissed. "You cannot wield creation and destruction together. They will consume you." The lanterns around us flickered violently. And the ground, it cracked. The soil beneath our feet split open. From the cracks, dark roots erupted, twisting and writhing like serpents. But they weren't just roots. They were veins pulsing with thick, black blood. They didn't lash out at us. They reached toward me, toward what I held. "Elena." Carol yanked at my arm, but I couldn't move. The seed in my palm burned hotter. The blade vibrated in my grip. The roots coiled tighter, forming a circle around us. And then the keeper raised both hands, its voice rising like the wind. "You have woken the heart." A deafening thrum pulsed through the garden. The air itself seemed to vibrate. The towering tree at the garden's center, the one filled with bone lanterns, began to split down the middle. And from within, something moved. Low. Deliberate. Ancient. "We need to go," Carol screamed. But there was no way out. The roots had closed in, forming an inescapable cage. The only path left was forward. Drawn by something beyond my understanding, I moved toward the splitting tree. The cracks widened, and through them I could see dozens, hundreds, butching, embedded in the wood like knots. Each eye blinked slowly, tracking my every step. Inside, the core of the tree pulsed like a heart. But it wasn't wood. It was flesh, blackened and cracked, veins pulsing with slow, rhythmic beats. "What is this?" Carol whispered, horrified. The keeper's voice slithered through the air. "The first root. The heart of the family." And I understood. This was where it all began. The seed in my palm pulsed in time with the heart. The blade trembled, eager. "One must be used," the keeper said. "Or the heart will take both." The heart beat louder. And with each pulse, the roots surged outward, spreading beyond the garden, deeper into the earth. "It's spreading," Carol shouted. I clenched my fists. "I can't choose. They both feel wrong." But the heart wasn't waiting. The roots began to crawl up my legs, slow but deliberate. The seed burned hotter, and the blade's hum turned into a low, menacing growl. "Elena, do something." The keeper didn't move. Balance must be restored. The heart cannot be both fed and bled. I stared at the heart, and I knew. If I planted the seed, the heart would grow stronger. If I used the blade, it might die. But so would everything tied to it, including me. But maybe, just maybe, there was a third way. I raised both the seed and the blade. And without thinking, I drove the blade into the seed. The moment metal pierced the glowing core, the seed screamed. Not aloud, but in my mind. The light from it cracked, bursting outward in jagged veins of light. The roots recoiled, hissing. The heart in the tree staggered, its rhythm faltering. But it wasn't dead. Not yet. From the shattered seed, a new substance leaked, black and gold twisting together. It wasn't blood. It wasn't sap. It was something new. And it dripped onto the roots. Where it touched, the roots began to wither. But not fully die. They changed, becoming brittle, fragile. The keeper let out a guttural sound. "Impossible." Carol grabbed my shoulder. "What did you do?" "I broke the cycle." But the heart screamed. The entire garden trembled. The tree began to split from top to bottom, its flesh-like bark tearing apart. The lanterns shattered, spilling bone fragments onto the ground. The eyes embedded in the wood blinked rapidly, their gazes becoming wild and panicked. "Run!" I screamed. We sprinted through the collapsing garden, roots crumbling to dust behind us. The keeper made no move to stop us. It simply stood there, watching the destruction unfold. "You have doomed us all." Its words echoed after us, but I didn't look back. 'Cause ahead, faint light, way out. We burst through, collapsing onto solid ground. The garden was gone, collapsed into itself. The tree had fallen, and the mirror was shattered. The sky above was clear. No blood-red clouds, no pulsing roots, just silence. "Is it over?" Carol asked, voice trembling. I stared at my hands. The seed was gone, the blade shattered. But the scar on my palm remained. Twisted, dark mark. And in the wind I thought I heard it. Faint whisper. "The heart must beat." Closed my eyes. And for the first time I wasn't sure if we had won, or if we had just made something worse. Some victories feel like defeat. Some endings feel like the beginning. And when you break a curse, you can't always control what takes its place. The world above was still. No more trembling ground. No roots clawing from beneath. No distant whispers. Just a cold, quiet breeze rustling through the leaves. I sank to my knees, staring at the dirt beneath me. It was over. At least that's what I wanted to believe. Carol knelt beside me, breathing hard, her face pale with exhaustion. "Elena." Her voice was thin, unsure. "Did we win?" I didn't answer. Because I wasn't sure. The scar on my palm still burned. A dull, steady throb. Like a pulse. "It's gone," I said quietly. But the words felt empty. Because deep down I could still feel it. Not the heart. Not the roots. but something else. Lurking. Waiting. Watching. We slowly made our way through the forest, the sun barely breaking through the canopy. Everything looked the same. Yet, it didn't. The trees leaned unnaturally. The air was heavier, like it carried the weight of unseen eyes. And in the corner of my vision, things moved. Shadows. But when I turned, nothing. Elena, stop, Carol muttered, gripping my arm. What if we didn't escape? I swallowed hard. We broke the mirror. The garden's gone. But even as I said it, doubt gnawed at me. Carol's eyes darted around. Then why do I feel like something followed us? I didn't have an answer. 'Cause I felt it too. And when I looked at the trees again, I saw it. Crack. Running up the trunk. Like a fracture in glass. Subtle. But there. As we continued, we came upon a small stream cutting through the forest. Crystal clear. But when I glanced into the water, my reflection wasn't mine. It was her. The other me. The cold, dark version that had haunted me in the mirror. She smiled. And mouthed a single word. Soon. I stumbled back, heart pounding. Carol grabbed my arm. What did you see? I shook my head, breath ragged. The mirror's gone, but it's not over. Because reflections don't need glass. The wind shifted. And with it came a voice. Delicate. Elena. My mother's voice. But impossibly distant. Like a memory. I spun around. Mom. Carol looked at me, confused. Elena, there's no one there. But I could hear it. Closer now. Come home. A chill crept up my spine. It's not real, I whispered to myself. But the voice didn't stop. Come home. Then, another voice layered over it. Grandma Lydia. We're waiting. I backed away, shaking. Whoa. You're gone. I ended this. The wind howled through the trees. And the whispers stopped. But not the feeling. The feeling that they were still here. Not as ghosts. But as something else. My palm burned. I tore off the wrapping and stared at the scar. It wasn't just a mark. It was spreading. Thin black veins creeping up my wrist, pulsing faintly. Carol's eyes widened. Elena, your hand. I swallowed hard. It's the price. Carol's voice trembled. For breaking the cycle. I nodded slowly. Or for refusing to follow it. The forest grew darker around us, the sun fading unnaturally fast. I clenched my fist, trying to steady my breath. Whatever they started isn't done. And as if answering, the ground beneath us trembled. But it wasn't the earth. It was something moving beneath it. But thinner. Faster. And they were everywhere. Ahead of us the trees shifted. Move. No, not trees. Figures. Tall, thin shapes standing unnaturally still. And then they moved. Low. Deliberate. Their faces became clear. Family. But not how I remembered them. Twisted. Ill. Smiling. Helen. Ruth. Lydia. All of them. They can't be here, Carol whispered in horror. But they were. Helen stepped forward. Her voice was soft, but carried in the still air. You didn't destroy us, Elena. Her eyes gleamed. You freed us. My heart sank. Because in that moment I knew. By breaking the cycle I hadn't ended it. I had unleashed it. The family moved closer. Their smiles never faltering. We waited for you to make the right choice, Helen purred. And you did. Her head tilted. You broke what kept us contained. The ground cracked again. Not from roots. From shadows. Spilling upward like smoke, twisting into shapes. Elena, we need to run. Carol's voice was panicked. But I couldn't move. Because I wasn't sure there was anywhere left to run. Helen smiled wider. The blood must beat again. And in my chest I felt it. Heartbeat. Not mine. But something far worse. They say family is everything. But what happens when family becomes the thing you fear the most? When the people you love are no longer people. But something far worse. The air around us was suffocating, thick with an unnatural stillness. Helen stood at the forefront of the dark figures, Her thin smile stretched unnaturally wide. Behind her, the twisted forms of Ruth, Lydia, and other family members loomed, their pale, distorted faces barely visible beneath the shadows. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their presence was enough to make my blood run cold. Carol gripped my arm, her fingers trembling. "Elena, we have to move." But my legs wouldn't obey. Because Helen wasn't looking at me like prey. She was looking at me like I belonged. "You didn't destroy us, Elena." Helen's voice slithered through the silence. "You brought us home." The ground beneath us cracked again, thin veins of shadow spreading like fractures. Live. I scanned the forest, desperately searching for a way out. But every path was blocked by them. No matter where we turned, another shadowed figure stood silently in the trees. A wall of flesh and memory. "They're everywhere," Carol whispered, her breath shallow. Helen took a slow step forward, the ground darkening under her feet. "You broke the cycle, and now the blood runs free." Her eyes gleamed. "Come with us, Elena. You were always meant to." I shook my head, stepping back. "Whoa, this isn't me. This isn't my family." Helen's smile never faltered. "Isn't it?" And then, from behind her, a new figure emerged. My mother. Live. Whole. But wrong. Her eyes were dark, void of life. And yet she smiled. "We only wanted to protect you, sweetheart." My breath caught. "Mom." Her smile widened. "Come home." The scar on my palm burned hotter, veins creeping up my arm like ink in water. Could feel it now. The heartbeat. Low. Heavy. And it wasn't coming from me. It was coming from them. Each of them pulsed in rhythm with the scar on my hand. Connected. Carol pulled at me. "We have to go. Now." But the ground trembled, roots tearing through the soil, twisting toward me. "Not to harm. To embrace." "They're pulling you in," Carol hissed. I fought to move, but every step felt heavier. Like the earth itself wanted me to stay. Helen raised her arms. "It's in your blood, Elena. Stop fighting." Her voice was soft, almost comforting. "You were born for this." And for a fleeting moment I felt it. Comfort. Pull. What if they're right? The thought whispered through my mind. What if fighting this was pointless? What if surrendering meant peace? The scar on my palm throbbed, veins darkening. I could feel the family's memories brushing against mine. Flickers of old laughter. Soft voices. Mom brushing my hair. Grandma baking in the kitchen. But they were wrong. Twisted. Like old film reels, distorted and burned. Carol's grip on my arm tightened. "Elena, don't you dare." Her voice snapped me back. "This isn't your family anymore." Helen tilted her head. "But they could be." The roots shifted, forming a narrow path deeper into the forest. "Follow it, and you'll understand." The others didn't move. They simply waited. Silent. Watching. Waiting for me to choose. Against every instinct I moved. Carol's protest was a distant sound as I stepped onto the path. The roots didn't attack. They guided. Twisting gently, leading me forward. The forest grew darker with every step. Colder. But not dead. Alive. Whispers tickled my ears. Not words. Memories. "You were always meant to be here. We did this for you. For the family." Ahead, the trees opened into a clearing. At its center, a well. Ancient. Carved from black stone, pulsing faintly. Helen's voice drifted behind me. "Look inside." I approached slowly. The air around the well was cold, burning my lungs. I peered over the edge. And saw myself. But not as I was. As I could be. Eyes black as night. Thin smile. Roots crawling up my arms. Blooming into flowers of flesh. I staggered back. "Whoa. No, that's not me." But the image didn't change. Just smiled. Yet, the well's reflection rippled. Shifting. Changing. I saw the house. But not how I remembered it. Whole. Alive. The walls pulsed like skin. Family portraits blinked slowly, eyes tracking my every move. And in the center, me. seated at the head of a long table. The family gathered around, silent, waiting, and I was smiling, cold, empty smile. "This is your future," Helen's voice whispered. "Unless you accept it now." I clenched my fists. No. But the reflection didn't vanish. Simply stared, waiting. The ground trembled beneath me. But this time it wasn't roots. It was me. The scar on my palm burned brighter, spreading up my arm. But not in black. In gold. A crack of light through the dark. Helen's eyes narrowed. "What have you done?" I didn't know. But I held on to it. The light. The only thing that wasn't theirs. And I realized. I didn't have to choose them. I didn't have to fight them. I just had to be stronger. The well shuddered. The reflection fractured. Helen's smile faltered. "Whoa. This isn't how it's supposed to end." I took a step back. And the family moved. Low. Deliberate. Closing in. "They say blood is thicker than water. But what if your blood is poison? What if every beat of your heart pulls you closer to becoming the very thing you fear? The only way to fight the darkness is to become something it cannot touch." The golden light creeping up my veins pulsed in time with the frantic beat of my heart. Helen's smile was gone now. Her expression darkened, her eyes narrowing into slits. Behind her, the rest of the family began moving, slowly, deliberately, closing the circle around me. Each step they took seemed to drain the very air from the space, tightening the grip on my chest. "This is not how it ends, Elena." Helen's voice cut through the suffocating silence. "You belong to us. To this blood." But something had shifted. The scar on my palm, once dark and cold, now burned with a brilliant golden glow, spiraling up my arm like living fire. And for the first time they hesitated. "What are you?" Helen hissed, her voice no longer soft and coaxing, but sharp and venomous. I didn't know the answer. But I knew I wasn't theirs. Not anymore. The light wasn't just a defense. It was alive. I could feel it moving, pulsing within me, not consuming but awakening. Memories that weren't mine flickered in my mind. Ancestors long forgotten, standing in defiance of this dark legacy. Voices whispering in the glow. "You are the fracture. The break in the bloodline. The change." For generations, this family had been shackled by secrets, by blood rituals and dark promises. But now something was different. I was different. "This ends now," I said, my voice stronger than before. Helen's eyes darkened, and the family hissed in unison. "You think light can save you," she sneered. "It cannot cleanse what you are." But the ground beneath me disagreed. The soil cracked, and thin veins of golden light seeped upward, cutting through the blackened roots. The family recoiled, their forms flickering like dying shadows. Helen's form began to distort, her once human face twisting into something ancient and monstrous. "Enough," she roared, the sound tearing through the air like a blade. The trees around us groaned, their bark splitting as black roots writhed in agony. But the light, my light, was spreading. The reflection in the well fractured, the dark image of myself shattering into 1,000 pieces. And in its place I saw something else. Not me, but a door. Hidden. Sealed long ago. And suddenly I understood. This wasn't about choosing between darkness and light. It was about finding the truth they had buried. The real source of this curse. "Carol!" shouted. She snapped out of her frozen fear. "We need to find it, the door." "What door?" "They hid it from us." Helen's scream cut through the clearing. "Don't you dare." The family lunged. Carol and I ran. Roots lashed out, clawing at our legs, the ground splitting as blackened hands reached upward. But the light spilling from my veins carved a path, searing the roots before they could touch us. Through the trees, the forest began to crack. A glass, splintering. And then we saw it. A massive, sealed door embedded into the earth. Covered in symbols, glowing faintly beneath layers of dirt and decay. "This is it," gasped. But Helen was already upon us. "You were never meant to see this." Her voice wasn't human anymore. It was layered, ancient, and full of rage. The family surged forward, their bodies stretching unnaturally as they clawed toward us. "Open it!" I screamed. Carol dropped to her knees, frantically brushing away the dirt, revealing more of the symbols. "How?" she cried. The scar on my palm pulsed. I knew. Without thinking, I pressed my glowing hand against the door. The symbols flared to life, and the door split open. We stumbled into the darkness beyond, the heavy stone door groaning shut behind us. The air was colder here, but not empty. The chamber was vast, carved from black stone, with walls covered in ancient carvings. At the center, a stone pedestal, and on it, a book, bound in dark leather, pulsing faintly. "The source." "The blood pact," I whispered. Helen's voice echoed beyond the door. "Don't touch it." But I already was. The moment my fingers brushed the cover, visions exploded in my mind. Generations of my family, bound by a ritual they could never escape. A promise made in blood. But I saw something else. Loophole. A way to break it. "This is how it ends." Carol's eyes widened. "Elena, wait." But it was too late. Open the book. And the chamber came alive. The pages flipped wildly, glowing symbols lifting into the air, spinning around us. I wasn't reading the words. I was living them. The truth surged into me. This curse wasn't born from some ancient ritual. It was a choice, made by Helen, and Lydia, and every matriarch after, to preserve power, to feed the family's dominance. But the price was the souls of their own blood. Bargain. One that could be undone. But not without cost. "It has to be given back," I muttered. Carol stared at me. "What does?" "The blood. Power. Everything they took." The ground trembled as Helen's voice shrieked beyond the door. "Stop." I raised the book, and spoke the words that would undo it all. The chamber exploded in light. Roots tore free from the walls, writhing in agony. The book burned in my hands, but I didn't let go. Because this was how it ended. The stolen power tearing free. Returning to where it belonged. Helen's screams echoed, fading into silence. And then, stillness. The book was gone. The light faded. And for the first time, it was quiet. Carol slowly stood. "Is it over?" I didn't answer. Because deep down I wasn't sure. But the scar on my hand was gone. And so was the darkness. Now, they say breaking a curse brings freedom. But they never tell you what fills the space where the curse once lived. Sometimes the silence that follows is louder than the screams that came before. The air was unnervingly still. The glowing symbols that had once danced violently in the air now drifted like dust, fading into nothing. The book was gone, reduced to ash that scattered in the faint breeze swirling through the chamber. But the walls, they felt different, lifeless, cold. The oppressive weight that had pressed against my chest since entering this place was gone. Yet something else lingered. A hollow echo, like a distant heartbeat fading into silence. I slowly looked at Carol, whose wide eyes reflected the same question burning inside me. "Is it over?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't answer. Because I wasn't sure. We cautiously stepped back toward the stone door, the ground beneath us groaning with every movement. Cracks spiderwebbed along the chamber floor, faint trails of gold flickering before fading into the dark stone. As I pressed my hand against the cold stone door, it creaked open, revealing the forest outside. But it wasn't the same. The trees no longer leaned in with suffocating closeness. The air wasn't as thick. And the sky, it was clear. No more blood-red hue. No more looming darkness. But it was also empty. Too empty. The forest that had once been alive with unsettling whispers was now silent. Completely still. Carol cautiously stepped forward, scanning the trees. "Where are they?" "Family. Helen. Lydia. All of them gone. Not a trace of their presence remained. No shadows watching from the treetops. No roots clawing up from the ground. But why didn't it feel like a victory? I rubbed my palm absent-mindedly, expecting the familiar burn of the scar. But there was nothing. Smooth skin. Clean. Yet I felt lighter and heavier all at once. "We broke the pact," I murmured. Carol's face twisted in confusion. "Then why does it feel like we lost?" I shook my head. Maybe because it wasn't a win. Maybe it was just necessary. Carol looked around, uneasy. Or maybe it's not over. Her words hung in the air, heavier than the silence itself, because part of me wondered the same. What if breaking the blood pact wasn't the end? What if it was a release? Without speaking, we began walking. The forest seemed endless now, but I knew exactly where I was going. The house. The source of it all. The place where the lies began. And when we arrived, it was still standing, but barely. The once grand family estate was now a hollow, skeletal shell. Walls crumbled, windows shattered, the front door hanging off its hinges. Yet, the house felt empty in a way that was unnatural. No hum of hidden power. No lingering darkness. Just a house. But houses keep secrets. "We need to check inside," I said quietly. Carol hesitated. "For what?" "They're gone." I shook my head. "Not all of them." We stepped carefully over the broken threshold, dust rising in the air. Every creak of the floorboards echoed like a scream in the hollowed space. Memories flickered at the edges of my mind, echoes of voices, laughter, and arguments that once filled these halls. But they were just that now. Echoes. Yet something felt off. Drawn by instinct, I led Carol down the narrow hallway to the east wing. To a door I had never noticed before. Plain. Unassuming. But wrong. As if it didn't belong. I reached for the doorknob, but it was ice cold. Twisting it slowly, the door creaked open, revealing a small, dimly lit study. And at the center of the room, resting on a worn wooden desk, was a single object. A mirror. Not cracked. Not shattered. Perfect. And waiting. I stared at the mirror, heart pounding in my chest. Carol's voice was a whisper. "No, it can't be." But it was. My reflection stared back. But it wasn't me. It was her. The other me. The one from the blood garden. Her eyes were calm. Her smile slow. And then she raised her hand. Pressed it against the glass. And mouthed a single word. "Soon." The mirror didn't crack. It didn't ripple. Just sat there quiet and still. But I understood now. Helen and the others were gone. But something had stayed. Something that didn't need blood to survive. Because reflections, they don't need mirrors. They just need to be remembered. Carol slowly backed away. "We need to destroy it." I didn't move. Because I wasn't sure that would work. "What if breaking it makes it worse?" I whispered. Carol's eyes darted to me. "Then what do we do?" I stared at the mirror. And for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw her smile. Later. Closer. Like she was almost free. "We wait," I whispered. 'Cause deep down I knew. This wasn't the end. Not yet. And in the faint reflection of the mirror, a voice whispered. "The blood must beat. They say when you break a curse, the nightmare ends. But what if the cracks you created only let something else in? Something worse. Something patient. Some reflections never shatter. They wait." The air in the forgotten study was suffocating, thick with dust and the scent of decay. The mirror sat quietly on the desk, its ornate frame untouched by time. I stood frozen in front of it, watching the other me. She smiled. Low. Confident. And I couldn't move. Her eyes, dark and endless, locked onto mine. Not angry. Not desperate. Just waiting. Carol's voice barely reached me. Distant and trembling. "Elena, step back." But I didn't. Because the reflection wasn't just a reflection anymore. It was thinking. Calculating. And then it moved. Not like me. On its own. Raising a finger slowly, it traced something onto the inside of the glass. Symbol. One I recognized. The same symbol carved into the stone door we opened. The same symbol that held back the curse. And it was cracking. The glass rippled faintly, the symbol glowing dimly before sinking into the mirror's surface. A whisper slithered through the air. "You didn't finish it." I staggered back, heart pounding. Carol grabbed my arm, pulling me away. "What was that?" I shook my head, gripping my scarless palm. "It's not over." The words trembled on my lips. The family was gone, yes. But the mirror had been waiting. Helen and the others were only one part of this curse. This was something deeper, older. And now it was awake. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through the walls. The house itself groaned, wood and stone shifting unnaturally. Carol's eyes darted around in panic. "Elena, what's happening?" The walls began to twist, bending in impossible ways. Hallways stretched longer than they should. Doorways led to nowhere. The house wasn't just falling apart. It was changing. "It's the mirror," I whispered. "It's warping the house." The reflection smiled wider, fingers tapping against the glass rhythmically. Each tap sent another ripple through the air, and the cracks on the walls spread. We turned to run, but the hallway behind us wasn't the same. Where there should have been a door, there was now an endless stretch of corridor. Dark, cold. No, this isn't possible," Carol stammered. But it was. The house wasn't just falling apart. It was alive, reshaping itself, trapping us. The walls breathed. The floor creaked like joints settling into place. And far off in the distance, faint laughter, soft and slow, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "We need to destroy it," Carol gasped. But I wasn't sure if we could, or if we even should. Because breaking the mirror might not end this. Might release it. I turned back toward the mirror. It wasn't just reflecting now. It was showing me things. Images flickered across its surface. Memories. But not all mine. Grandma. Helen. All standing before this very mirror. Whispering things I couldn't hear. Performing rituals. Feeding it. And then, me. A future I didn't recognize. Standing in front of the mirror, smiling. Holding Carol's hand, but her face was empty. Her eyes gone. I flinched, breaking eye contact. But the image lingered in my mind. Was this a warning? Or a promise? The ornate frame of the mirror began to splinter. Thin cracks racing along its edges. But not from damage. From inside. Something was pushing. Trying to come through. Carol's breathing quickened. "We have to break it, Elena." But my feet were glued to the floor. Because in the reflection, I saw something else. Another figure. Standing behind us. Shadow. Slowly raising a hand. To touch the glass. "Carol, don't move." She froze. Why? But it was too late. The mirror shattered. Not into pieces. But into doors. Each shard of the mirror remained suspended in the air. Rotating slowly. But inside each fragment were different places, different versions of the house, of us, some dark, some burning, some empty. "These are doors," I realized. "To what?" Carol asked, horrified. I didn't know. But one of them, the largest shard, showed Helen, still alive, still waiting, and she smiled. We never left. The shards pulsed, vibrating softly in the air, inviting us, no challenging us. "They want us to choose," I murmured. Carol's voice cracked. "We can't stay here." "But how do we know which one?" I didn't. But standing still wasn't an option. The walls groaned louder. And behind us, the air rippled, like something was about to step through. "We have to pick one," I said. And slowly I reached for a shard. Not the one showing Helen, but another. One that showed nothing. Just darkness. But sometimes, nothing is safer than something. Or so I hoped. Some doors are meant to stay closed. Some reflections are meant to stay trapped. But what happens when you break the glass? When every choice leads to a darker place than the last? We didn't step through a door. We fell into something far worse. The moment my fingers grazed the cold, suspended shard of glass, the world around us fractured. The air itself seemed to shatter. One moment we stood in the decaying house, surrounded by fragments of the mirror. And in the next we were falling. Not down, not up, just falling, weightless, directionless. The only sound was a distant, distorted echo of laughter, stretching endlessly in every direction. Carol's scream was swallowed by the void. I reached for her hand, and missed. She slipped away, vanishing into the dark. Carol! But my voice didn't carry. Not here. The blackness wasn't empty. It was alive, watching, pulling, waiting. And then, impact. I slammed into solid ground, coughing as cold air burned my lungs. The world spun, blurring into focus. And I realized where I was. The family estate, but not the one I knew, stood pristine, whole, untouched by time or decay. The walls gleamed under a soft, unnatural light. The windows were dark, like hollow eyes watching me. And the air was thick with the scent of old wood and dried flowers. No, I whispered. This wasn't our world. It was a reflection of it. And I was inside the mirror. But where was Carol? I moved cautiously, each step echoing through the stillness. There were no sounds of life. No wind. No insects. Just silence. And yet, I wasn't alone. I could feel it. Watching. Tracking my every move. I passed by a gilded mirror hanging on the hallway wall. But my reflection wasn't mine. It was her. The other me. Standing perfectly still. Smiling. And behind her, Helen. Closer than before. I spun around. Nothing. But the reflection didn't change. You can't run from what's already inside you. Helen's voice slithered through the walls. It was coming from everywhere. And nowhere. I forced myself forward, moving through endless hallways that seemed to shift with every step. Doors appeared and vanished. Staircases looped back onto themselves. Every room was wrong. Familiar but off. Family portraits lined the walls, but their faces were blank. Featureless. Watching. I stopped at a door I didn't recognize. Heavy wooden, with deep claw marks scratched into its surface. Against every instinct I opened it. Inside was a room bathed in flickering candlelight. And at its center, Carol. But she wasn't alone. Carol was standing, frozen, surrounded by the family. Helen, Lydia, Ruth, all of them. But they weren't attacking. They were waiting. Silent. Watching. Helen's cold smile deepened when she saw me. Ah, there she is. Carol's eyes met mine, wide with fear. Elena. They didn't follow us. Her voice trembled. They were already here. I stepped forward, but the air thickened, pushing me back. Helen's voice dripped with venom. You broke the glass, Elena. You let us in. Her eyes gleamed. But this is where we've always been. You think you've escaped the curse. Helen chuckled. You didn't break it. You freed it. Her hand waved through the air, and the walls shimmered. Reflections flickered on every surface. But they weren't ours. They were versions of us. Thousands of them. Different Elenas. Different Carols. Some screaming. Some broken. Some smiling. Every choice you make leads to us. Helen stepped closer. You can't fight what you are. The other me in the mirror smiled wider. And you can't run forever. Helen gestured, and 3 mirrors rose from the ground. Each one rippled faintly. Mirror 1 showed me and Carol walking away from the house, the sky burning behind us. Mirror 2 showed me standing alone, the family bowing before me. Mirror 3 showed nothing but darkness. Choose, Elena, Helen purred. Every door leads home. Carol's voice cracked. Don't trust her. It's a trick. But the mirrors pulsed, waiting, inviting. And the house groaned around us, growing impatient. I looked at Carol, Helen, the mirrors, and I realized there was no right choice. Only the one that would hurt the least. If that even existed. The mirrors began to crack, fractures spreading slowly, like ticking clocks. Helen smiled, stepping back into the shadows. Choose wisely. Because if I didn't, they would choose for me. They say every choice has a consequence. But what if every path leads to the same nightmare? What if the choice is nothing but an illusion, designed to break you from the inside out? Because sometimes the door you refuse to open is the one already standing wide open. The room was suffocating, the air so thick it felt like it was pressing into my skin. Before me, the 3 mirrors shimmered with a faint, unnatural glow. Each one pulsed like a heartbeat, cracks slowly crawling along the glass. Mirror 1. Flames devoured the family estate, and in the foreground Carol and I stood back to back, gripping each other's hands, our faces pale and exhausted as the sky burned behind us. Mirror 2 showed me standing alone in the center of the family's ancient hall. Helen and the others were bowing at my feet, their faces blank, obedient. My eyes weren't mine. They were dark, cold, and empty. Mirror 3, a void. Complete darkness. No movement. No sound. Just the emptiness that seemed to reach out to me. Helen's voice slithered through the room, low and sharp. It's simple, Elena. Choose your future. I clenched my fists. None of these are my future, I snapped. Helen's cold laugh echoed. Oh, but they are. They always were. You only need to decide which version of yourself you'll become. I turned to Carol, her eyes darting anxiously between the mirrors. We can't trust this, she whispered. He nodded. It's a trick. Helen doesn't give choices. She never has. But the mirrors continued to fracture, and the ground trembled beneath our feet. We have to do something. I stared into the dark glass of the 3rd mirror, its emptiness both terrifying and strangely inviting. Maybe it's not about choosing one, I murmured. Then what? Carol demanded. The answer surfaced slowly, chilling me to the bone. Maybe it's about refusing to choose at all. Helen's smile faltered. Careful, Elena. There are rules here. Her voice, usually smooth and commanding, now carried a hint of unease. I stepped forward, not toward the mirrors but away from them. Your choices are traps, I said. But what happens if I make my own? Helen's face darkened, her eyes narrowing. Don't be foolish. The mirrors cracked louder, fractures reaching their edges. Like a clock winding down. I turned sharply and drove my fist into the wall beside the mirrors. Not glass. Not stone. Hollow. Carol's eyes widened. What are you doing? This isn't real. None of it is. The real door isn't the one they're showing us. Without hesitation, I slammed my fist again. The wall crumbled like paper. And behind it, a narrow, dark passage. Helen's expression twisted in rage. No! The mirrors shattered. The hidden passage yawned open before us, swallowing all light. I didn't wait. I grabbed Carol's hand and ran. Behind us, Helen's scream tore through the walls, shaking the ground. You can't escape me. Her voice splintered into 1,000 echoes. But we didn't look back. The walls of the passage pressed in close, damp and cold, like the house was trying to crush us. Yet, the farther we ran, the more the air thinned. Until suddenly, we burst into light. We stumbled into a massive, overgrown garden bathed in twilight. Twisted vines climbed ancient statues, and dead leaves blanketed the ground. At the center of the garden stood a withered tree, its branches tangled and bare. Yet from its trunk, thin veins of golden light pulsed slowly. Carol caught her breath. What is this place? I shook my head slowly. I think this is where it began. At the base of the tree, half buried in the earth, was a stone slab, etched with the same symbol Helen had drawn in the mirror. But this one was incomplete. Broken. It was never finished, I whispered. The curse wasn't fully sealed. It was left open, intentionally or not. And this was the breach. As I approached the tree, whispers curled through the air. Pleading. Complete it. End it. The whispers came from everywhere. And nowhere. But another voice, deeper and colder, cut through them. Or take it. Helen. But not the Helen we knew. Her voice came from the tree itself, from its dying roots. Finish the seal and bury us forever. or claim it as yours. The choice was mine. But which one would save us? And which one would doom us all? Carol gripped my arm. Elena, whatever you do, don't let it in. But my hand hovered over the broken symbol. The light within the tree pulsed faster, brighter. And deep within the bark something moved. Not roots, not branches, ends, reaching, waiting. I closed my eyes, took a breath, and made my choice. Some choices feel like freedom. Others feel like chains tightening around your throat. But the worst choices, they're the ones you make without knowing what they truly cost. And I had just made one. My fingertips hovered over the cracked stone slab at the base of the withered tree. The broken symbol beneath my hand pulsed faintly, flickering between light and shadow. In that moment, the world around me held its breath. The whispers in the wind twisted together. Finish it. Break it. Take it. Each voice tugged at a different part of me. But I had already made my choice. I pressed my palm against the symbol. The ground shuddered beneath me. And the light that pulsed from the tree surged, swallowing everything in blinding gold. The golden light coiled up my arm, searing into my veins. But it wasn't pain. Not exactly. It was something deeper. Like my very soul was being rewritten. I gasped, falling to my knees, my hand still fused to the stone. Carol lunged forward. Elena! Let go. But I couldn't. Wouldn't. The tree groaned, and from its twisted branches, something began to emerge. Not Helen. Not my family. Something older. A shape, carved from light and shadow. It had no face, but its presence filled the air like a storm about to break. It spoke without words. You have chosen. The ground split open, and the roots of the tree moved, slithering toward me. Not to harm me. Join me. No! Carol screamed, grabbing my shoulders, trying to pull me away. But the light fought back, wrapping around me tighter. And then, stop. Silence. I gasped for air, collapsing backward. The light faded. The tree was still. But it wasn't dead. Its bark had mended, the cracks sealed. The once withered branches now stretched wide, pulsing faintly with golden veins. And the symbol on the stone was whole. Completed. But something was different. The mark had seared itself into my palm. No longer a scar. It was alive. Carol stared at me wide-eyed. What did you do? I opened my mouth to answer. But the ground shook violently. The sky above the garden cracked like glass, fractures spreading across the twilight. From the shattered sky, shadows poured in, writhing like smoke. They weren't the family. They weren't Helen. They were worse. Things with no shape, no faces, just hunger. And they were coming for us. Carol pulled me to my feet. You were supposed to end it, she shouted. But the truth hit me harder than her words. I hadn't ended the curse. I had awakened it. The roots of the tree, once glowing softly, now twisted violently, thrashing and splitting the ground. The stone slab crumbled, the symbol flickering. The garden darkened as the shadows descended, weaving between the branches like serpents. Run! I screamed, grabbing Carol's hand. But the garden shifted, paths closing behind us, new ones opening ahead, leading us deeper. It's leading us somewhere, Carol panted. I didn't answer, because I knew exactly where it was taking us. We burst through a narrow passage into a vast, underground chamber. The walls pulsed with the same golden veins, stretching into infinity. At the center stood an ancient, massive mirror. Not broken, not cracked, perfect. And in its reflection, saw her, Helen. But not the Helen we knew. Younger, alive, standing beside my mother. And my grandmother, all smiling, holding hands, performing the very ritual I had just completed. It's always been this way, Helen's reflection whispered. You're one of us now. Carol trembled beside me. Whoa. Elena, this can't be. But deep down I knew it was. The curse was never about Helen. Never about the family. It was the mirror. Chose us. Created us. Every generation. A new vessel. And now it was me. No, I whispered. But the reflection of Helen shook her head. You finished the seal. You completed what we began. The mirror pulsed. Now you must protect it. The shadows behind us froze. Waiting. Watching. Not attacking. Because they no longer needed to. I was no longer a threat. I was their guardian. Carol's voice broke through my thoughts. Elena, please. We have to fight it. I looked at my hand. The glowing mark. And I realized. There was no fight left. Only a choice. To accept. Or to destroy everything. Including myself. I stepped forward toward the mirror. Helen's smile widened. Welcome home. But I stopped. And raised my hand. The light burning brighter than ever. Carol gasped. Elena. What are you doing? I didn't answer. Because this time I wasn't choosing what they wanted. I was choosing what they feared. And with all my strength, I drove my fist into the mirror. They say breaking the mirror ends the curse. But what if the mirror was the only thing holding the darkness back? Some things aren't meant to be broken. Some reflections should never be freed. And I had just shattered the only barrier keeping them in. My fist collided with the mirror, and the glass didn't just crack, it exploded. Shards of glass scattered through the air like falling stars, catching the faint golden glow of the veins in the walls. The mirror didn't fall to pieces. It disintegrated, dissolving into black dust that swirled around us, twisting like smoke. The ground trembled beneath my feet, the air pulsing with an unbearable pressure. Carol screamed my name, but the sound felt distant. The chamber groaned as if something deep within it had awakened. And in that suffocating silence, I realized my mistake. From where the mirror once stood, the air ripped open, not like glass breaking, but like the very fabric of reality was tearing apart. A jagged, gaping void yawned before us, pulsating with inky shadows. And from within it, they came. Not Helen, not my family, but something far older. Twisted, formless shadows that slithered and crawled into the chamber, clawing their way into our world. They weren't bound to any human form. They were pure hunger, pure hate, and I had just set them free. No. No, this wasn't supposed to happen. I gasped, stumbling backward. But it was too late. The shadows moved with purpose, their forms coiling and expanding, filling every corner of the chamber. Carol's face twisted in horror as the shadows closed in. Elena, what did you do? She screamed, pulling at my arm. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, because I saw it. The shadows didn't rush toward us. They circled. They weren't here to destroy us. They were waiting. And then I heard it. Helen's voice. Mocking. You think you can destroy what you are. Her laughter echoed from the void, deeper and colder than before. You didn't end it, Elena. You completed it. From the swirling darkness, figures began to emerge. First Helen, then Lydia, then the others. But they weren't human anymore. Their forms flickered between flesh and shadow, their faces half-formed and distorted. Helen stepped forward, her eyes hollow but burning with a sinister glow. We are not your family anymore. Her voice was layered, distorted, as if spoken by many mouths. We are what you made us. Carol stumbled backward. We have to get out of here. But the shadows blocked every exit, walls of black smoke twisting into impossible shapes. There was no way out, only through. Helen raised her hand, and the shadows surged forward, coiling around my body. But they didn't suffocate me. They merged with me. The mark on my palm burned, glowing brighter as the shadows slithered into my veins. I felt them, filling the empty spaces inside me. And for a moment it felt, right, powerful. This is what you were meant to be, Helen whispered, stepping closer. You are the vessel. The mirror was never to hold us. It was to hold you. My knees buckled. The weight of the truth crushed me. I wasn't the one breaking the curse. I was the key. Oh, this isn't you, Elena. Carol screamed, shaking me violently. Her voice cracked, raw and terrified. Fight it. But could I? The darkness curled around me like armor, whispering promises of control, of freedom. I saw flashes in my mind, versions of myself in the mirrors. All of them had accepted it. But I wasn't like them. I had to believe that. I'm not like them, I choked out. Helen's smile was ice. Prove it. The shadows lunged forward, rushing toward Carol. Without thinking, I raised my hand. And the shadows froze. Bitter. Quivering. Waiting. For me. They obeyed me. Helen's grin faltered for the first time. You can't control them, she hissed. But I could. Because they were part of me now. And I was still me. Get out, I growled. The shadows recoiled, hesitating. I said get out. With a surge of will, I forced the darkness to retreat. The ground cracked. The void pulsed violently. And then began to collapse. The walls of the chamber fractured. And the sky above the garden shattered further. Carol grabbed my hand. We have to move. We ran, the ground crumbling beneath us. Helen's scream echoed behind us, lost in the collapsing void. The shadows howled, spiraling back into the nothingness. And then, silence. The air cleared. The ground steadied. And the void was gone. We collapsed in the garden, gasping for air. The tree stood still, its glow gone. The house was silent. No voices, no shadows. But as I looked at my hand, the mark was still there, faint but present. Carol looked at me, eyes wide. Is it over? I didn't answer. Because deep down I knew. You can't destroy something that lives inside you. You can only keep it from taking over. For now. Some battles end with victory. Others, with survival. But when the enemy is inside you, how do you know if the fight is over? Or if it's just waiting for you to let your guard down? Thought I had won. But in the silence, I could still hear them whispering. The world had gone still. Carol and I lay on the cold, cracked earth of the garden. The twisted tree stood lifeless now, its once glowing veins dull and cold. The sky above, once fractured and bleeding shadows, now stretched in eerie silence. But it wasn't peaceful. It was too quiet, too still. Carol coughed beside me, breaking the silence. Elena. Is it over? I wanted to say yes, but the weight in my chest told me otherwise. I sat up slowly, glancing at my hand. The mark was still there, faint but alive, pulsing. I don't know. And that terrified me. Because if the shadows were gone, why did I still feel them? We stumbled back toward the house. Its dark windows staring at us like hollow eyes. It looked the same as before, but nothing about it felt the same. Every creak of the wooden steps beneath our feet sounded louder, sharper. The walls seemed closer, the shadows deeper. I brushed my fingers along the old wallpaper. It was cold, too cold. Carol shivered beside me. This place. It's still wrong. He nodded. 'Cause I could feel it too. Like the house was holding its breath, waiting. We entered the grand hallway, lined with ancient portraits of our ancestors. But something was off. The faces were different. They weren't blank anymore. They were watching us. Eyes that seemed to follow every movement. And in the center of it all was a new portrait. Fresh, wet paint still glistening. It was me, standing in front of the mirror, hand outstretched. And behind me, figure, shadowed, smiling. Carol's breath caught. That wasn't here before. I stared at the painting, feeling the cold grip of fear tightening around my throat. Whoa. It wasn't. A faint whisper slithered through the air. Barely audible, but unmistakable. Finish it. Carol spun around. Did you hear that? I nodded slowly. Because it wasn't just in the air. It was in my head. The shadows weren't gone. They had gone deeper, buried within the walls, within me. And they were waiting. As we moved through the house, something caught my eye. A door. One I had never seen before. Tucked behind the grand staircase, almost hidden by the shadows. It was small, and slightly ajar. A faint, cold draft leaked through the gap. Elena. Maybe we shouldn't, Carol whispered. But I was already moving toward it. Because whatever was behind that door was calling to me. Pushed it open. The room was small and dark, lit only by the flickering glow of a single candle. The walls were lined with mirrors. Dozens of them. All cracked. All covered in dust. But one stood untouched. At its base lay a stack of old leather-bound journals. I knelt down, brushing off the dust. The top journal was open. And the handwriting was familiar. It was Grandma Evelyn's. The seal is weakening. The shadows are stirring. It breaks. God help us all. My hands trembled as I turned the page. More entries. Detailed accounts of rituals. Of sacrifices. And one name repeated over and over. My mother's. She knew, I whispered. They both knew. Carol leaned over my shoulder. What does it mean? I swallowed hard. It means the curse was never about the mirror. Not really. I glanced at the untouched mirror in the corner. It's about us. The family. The rituals. The sacrifices. They weren't meant to seal the curse. They were meant to feed it. Keep it asleep. And now it was awake. But if they could feed it, maybe we can starve it. The untouched mirror began to ripple. Slowly. A faint crack stretched across its surface. And in its reflection, I didn't see us. Saw her. Helen. Standing in the garden. But not from before. From now. Her head slowly turned toward me. And she smiled. You're too late. The mirror shattered. The ground shook. The walls groaned. And the whispers turned to screams. The house was alive again. And this time it wasn't going to let us leave. Some houses are built with bricks and wood. Others are built with secrets, betrayal, and blood. You can burn the walls, break the mirrors, and bury the truth. But a house like this, it never forgets. And it never forgives. The walls of the house groaned, wood splintering as if the very bones of the estate were twisting. Dust and fragments of the ceiling rained down as the ground shuddered beneath us. Carol clung to my arm, her eyes darting to the cracking walls. Elena, the house, it's alive, I finished, my voice hollow. We weren't standing in a home anymore. We were standing inside a living thing. The portraits on the walls began to bleed, dark stains oozing down the gilded frames. The figures within them twisted, their faces warping into grotesque smiles. From deep within the halls, a faint lullaby drifted toward us. Familiar. My mother's voice. Hush now, don't you cry. Rest your head, the dark is nigh. We need to get out of here, Carol whispered, pulling me toward the front door. But as we moved, the hallways stretched, twisting unnaturally. What should have been a straight path spiraled into impossible turns. Doors vanished. Windows bricked themselves shut. Every exit led us back to the same place. The mirror room. But the mirror was gone. Only a dark, empty frame remained on the wall. And in its reflection, Helen. Her grin stretched wider than humanly possible. Leaving so soon, she cooed. But you just came home. The walls around us began to whisper, voices slithering through the cracks. Finish it. Take your place. Become one of us. They weren't just Helen's voice. They were my mother's, my grandmother's, and voices I didn't even recognize. Generations of my family, bound to this place. Trap. Elena, they're in the walls, Carol hissed, spinning around. But I already knew. Because they weren't just in the walls. They were in me. In the corner of the mirror room, the wall seemed thinner. A small fracture ran down the surface like a crack in glass. I pressed my hand against it, and the wall gave way, revealing a narrow, dark passage. Cold air seeped out, carrying the scent of damp earth and something far older. Carol hesitated. Elena, where does that lead? I swallowed hard. I don't know. But it's the only way forward. We stepped into the darkness. The passage twisted downward, spiraling deeper into the earth. The air grew colder, heavier, as if the weight of the entire house was pressing down on us. At the end of the tunnel, we emerged into a vast underground chamber. The walls were lined with bones, not laid to rest, but woven into the very structure. And at the center stood an ancient altar, cracked and weathered. Above it, a massive, shattered mirror hung in pieces, suspended by rusted chains. But in those shards, reflections moved on their own. Helen, my mother, my grandmother, all staring back at me. "Welcome to the heart, Elena," Helen's voice echoed. "This is where it all began. And where it must end." On the altar lay a rusted dagger, its blade etched with the same symbol that marked my palm. Blood stained the stone beneath it. My family's blood. "This is how they bound us," I whispered. Ritual after ritual. Sacrifice after sacrifice. Feeding the house. Feeding the curse. Helen's reflection tilted her head. "Finish what they started, or join them forever." The dagger pulsed faintly. Choice. Sacrifice. Or submission. Carol's grip tightened on my arm. "Don't do it, Elena. There's another way." But was there? The house was alive. It wouldn't let us go. Not without blood. I stepped forward and reached for the dagger. Helen's grin deepened. But instead of the altar, I turned the blade on the walls, driving it deep into the bone and stone. The chamber screamed. The walls trembled. Cracks spiderwebbed across the ceiling. "No!" Helen's voice roared. "You can't break the bloodline." But I wasn't breaking the bloodline. I was breaking the cycle. The house began to collapse, walls caving in, the ground splitting beneath us. Carol screamed, pulling me toward the passage. We ran, the ground crumbling behind us. The voices in the walls shrieked in rage and terror. But I didn't stop. I didn't look back. And then, we burst through the front door, collapsing onto the cold, damp grass outside. The house groaned one last time. And then it was silent. Smoke curled from its shattered windows. But it stood still. Broken but not destroyed. Carol coughed, sitting up. "Is it over?" she rasped. I looked at the house. Then at my hand. The mark was still there. Winter. But still alive. "For now," I whispered. But in the distance beyond the trees, I saw it. Faint flicker of light. Like a candle. Waiting. Watching. The house may have fallen. But the shadows. They were still out there. I thought breaking the mirror would end it all. But some curses don't break. They adapt. And now, the house wasn't just holding on to us. It was becoming us. The walls of the house shuddered, groaning like a beast awakening from a deep slumber. Dust rained from the ceiling as the wooden beams cracked and stretched unnaturally. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp wood and something darker, something rotting. Carol's grip on my arm tightened. "Elena. The house is moving." And it was. The hallway behind us seemed to stretch, walls pulsing like they were breathing. Doors vanished. New ones appeared. The house wasn't just alive. It was aware. And it was closing in. We ran. But every turn led us somewhere new. A hallway that should have led to the foyer instead spiraled back into the basement. Doors slammed shut before we could reach them. Others creaked open into empty voids. "It's leading us," I whispered, breathless. Carol looked at me, panic flashing in her eyes. "Leading us where?" I swallowed hard. Back to where it all began. And deep down I knew. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was her. Helen. Or something worse. After what felt like hours of twisting corridors and dead ends, we stumbled into a room that stopped me cold. The study. But it wasn't as we left it. The bookshelves were gone. The walls pulsed with dark veins, twisting like roots beneath rotting wallpaper. And in the center stood the mirror. But it wasn't shattered. It was whole, pristine, as if I had never broken it. And in its surface I saw her. Not Helen. My mother. Alive. Smiling. "Welcome home, Elena." Behind my mother in the reflection stood the entire family. Helen. Evelyn. Faces I thought I'd never see again. But they weren't human. They flickered between flesh and shadow, their features twisting unnaturally. "Why are they here?" Carol whispered. I couldn't answer. Because my reflection moved without me. It smiled and raised its hand, beckoning me closer. Join us. My mother's voice was soft, sweet. But it was wrong. No, I breathed, stepping back. The reflection's smile widened. You never had a choice. The mirror's surface rippled, and the air shifted. The floor beneath us cracked, and a violent wind tore through the room, pulling everything toward the mirror. The furniture. Carol screamed as she clung to the doorway. Elena, don't look at it. But I couldn't look away. The reflection of my mother stretched out her hand, and I felt myself moving toward it. Not walking. Rag. The pull was too strong. Fight it, I screamed to myself. But it was inside me now. A house. A mirror. Curse. All of it. And it wanted me back. Carol's voice cut through the storm. Elena, look. Through the corner of my eye, I saw it. Door. Not one created by the house. Well, rusted. Real. The original door to the family's ritual chamber. Before Helen. Before the curse. Maybe before it all started. We have to go, Carol shouted. But the mirror screamed. A sound so deep it rattled my bones. The reflection of my mother twisted, her smile cracking unnaturally. You leave now, and you'll never escape. I didn't wait to answer. We ran. The door creaked open, revealing a stone staircase spiraling downward. Cold air drifted up, carrying the scent of earth and old blood. Carol hesitated. What is this place? I swallowed. Where it all began. We descended slowly, each step echoing into the dark. At the bottom was a circular chamber, walls covered in ancient symbols. In the center, a stone pedestal, and on it, a small cracked mirror shard, still glowing faintly. The first mirror, I whispered. The original. Not Helen's. Not Evelyn's. This was older, deeper, and it was still alive. I stared at the shard, my hand trembling. If I broke it, would it end everything? Or release something far worse? Carol's voice broke through my thoughts. Elena, we have to decide. But how could I choose? Every choice so far had only led to more pain, more darkness. But maybe this wasn't about breaking the curse. Maybe it was about containing it. Forever. I reached out, fingers hovering over the shard. And it spoke. Finish it. Sometimes silence is the loudest scream. And in that silence, shadows move. We thought breaking the mirror ended the nightmare. But the house was still breathing. And its walls remembered everything. The floor trembled beneath our feet, the vibrations growing stronger with every passing second. Dust cascaded from the ceiling, and the walls groaned like an ancient beast stretching after a long slumber. Carol gripped my arm, her breath ragged. Elena, the house. It's moving. She wasn't wrong. The hallway in front of us shifted, elongating unnaturally. Doors we had passed minutes before were gone, replaced by blank, pulsing walls. It was as if the house was alive, reshaping itself to trap us. We have to move. Now. I snapped, pulling her forward. But every step we took led us deeper into the labyrinth. The house wasn't just trapping us. It was guiding us. We turned a sharp corner, finding ourselves in a narrow corridor lined with mirrors. But these weren't shattered like before. They were intact, perfectly polished, reflecting not us, but scenes from the past. In one mirror I saw my mother, her face pale as she whispered to my grandmother. In another I saw Helen younger, standing in this very hallway, tracing her fingers over the same walls. They've always been here, I murmured. What do you mean? Carol asked, voice barely above a whisper. These walls. They hold every secret, every lie, every betrayal. And now they're showing us everything. Carol's reflection suddenly moved without her. It turned to face me, lips parting in a chilling grin. Finish what they started. I stumbled back, heart pounding. The mirror cracked down the center. But the reflection didn't break. Just kept smiling. The ground shifted beneath us, a dull pulse radiating through the floorboards. It was leading us, dragging us forward. Do you hear that? Carol asked. I nodded slowly. Faint rhythmic beating. Like a distant heartbeat. It wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from below. The basement. It's calling us. We found ourselves standing before a door we had never seen before. Heavy. Iron locks twisted across its surface. But it was open. Just enough to let the cold breath of the house seep through. We can't go down there, Carol whispered, shaking her head. But I knew we had no choice. If we don't end this, it will never stop. Without another word, I pushed the door open. The staircase spiraled downward into darkness. Each step groaned under our weight. The air growing colder, thicker. And then, we reached the bottom. A vast chamber stretched out before us, dimly lit by flickering candles floating midair. In the center stood a stone altar, cracked and ancient. But what made my blood run cold was what hovered above it. Mirror. Oh. Untouched. Not shattered like before. Whoa. I broke it, I whispered. Carol's grip on my arm tightened. Then why is it here? The surface rippled. And Helen appeared within it, smiling. Because you didn't break me. Helen's voice echoed, wrapping around us like a vice. You thought shattering the mirror would end it. Her smile widened. You only broke the surface. The roots run deeper than you can imagine. The candles flared, casting monstrous shadows against the walls. The ground trembled. And the altar cracked open. From within, dark tendrils began to rise. Slowly, patiently. You finished the seal, Elena. Now you must complete the circle. The tendrils snaked toward me, coiling around my wrists, my throat. Not to hurt me, to bind me. Carol lunged forward, trying to pull them off. But the shadows passed right through her. They don't want me, I gasped. They only want you. The mirror rippled again, and this time it wasn't Helen I saw. It was me. But not as I was. I stood at the altar, surrounded by shadows bowing before me. My eyes were empty. My hands soaked in blood. This is who you become, Helen whispered. Unless you take control. I fought the grip of the shadows, pulling against their hold. But the more I fought, the tighter they squeezed. They didn't want to destroy me. They wanted to merge. To become one. Elena, fight it. Carol screamed. But my strength was fading. And the shadows were winning. In a surge of clarity, I realized the truth. Helen wasn't here to trap me. She was here to replace me. Carol, run. I screamed. I can't leave you. Go. As Carol hesitated, I did the only thing I could. I reached for the mirror. And instead of breaking it, I stepped into it. They say a house holds memories. But what if the walls don't just hold memories? They feed on them. Every scream, every secret, every drop of pain soaked into the foundation. And when the house finally breathes, it remembers. The walls trembled as though the house itself was stretching after a long, cold slumber. Dust fell in thin curtains from the ceiling. The air turned heavier, thicker, as if the house was inhaling deeply. Alive. Carol clung to my arm, eyes wide in terror. Elena. It's waking up. I didn't respond. 'Cause I could feel it too. A low, almost imperceptible hum beneath my feet. Like a distant heartbeat, echoing from deep within the walls. The house wasn't just a house anymore. It was watching. And it was hungry. We turned to run back the way we came. But the hallway was gone. In its place, an endless corridor stretched forward, the walls narrowing with every step. This wasn't here before. Carol stammered. Panic tightened my chest. It's changing. It's not going to let us out. The wallpaper on the walls peeled and pulsed like skin. Portraits on the walls twisted. Faces we knew now smiled unnaturally, eyes tracking our every movement. And in the distance, the faint sound of a lullaby drifted through the air. Familiar. And utterly wrong. The lullaby grew louder, wrapping around us. A song from childhood. One my mother used to hum when I was a child. But my mother wasn't here. Do you hear that? Carol's voice was barely a whisper. I nodded, frozen. It's her. But it wasn't. It was the house. Mocking. Repeating. Feeding me pieces of comfort twisted into something unrecognizable. Don't listen to it, I snapped, grabbing Carol's hand and pulling her forward. But the song followed. And the walls began to close in. We stumbled into a large open room, a hall of mirrors. But these weren't just reflections. Each mirror showed fragments of memories. My memories. Grandma. Helen. Conversations I barely remembered. Arguments I thought were forgotten, flickering across the glass like old film. In one mirror, I saw my mother whispering to Grandma in hushed tones. "It has to stay hidden, Evelyn. She can't know." And then the reflection of me walked into view, staring back. But it wasn't just a reflection. It was smiling. The reflection raised its hand and pressed against the glass. But the glass pushed back. Cracks spiderwebbed across the surface. But it didn't break. It was trapped. Or maybe waiting. "This isn't real," I whispered. But the reflection spoke. "Isn't it?" Its voice wasn't mine. It was Helen's. But distorted. Twisted. Carol reached for my shoulder, pulling me back. "Elena, we have to move." But I couldn't look away. "She's still here," I muttered. "Helen never left." And then the mirrors shattered. The shards of glass didn't fall. They floated, suspended in the air, shimmering like stars. And from the cracks in the walls, something began to seep through. A dark, thick liquid, oozing slowly. Not blood, but ink. It crawled along the floor, reaching for us. Carol screamed, "Run!" But the ink moved faster, snaking up the walls, bleeding from the portraits. Each drop seemed to whisper, "Stay. Join us. Finish what was started." And from the shadows, Helen's face began to form in the blackness. Smiling. Waiting. We ran. Twisting corridors, endless doorways, each more warped than the last. Until we reached a door unlike any other. Carved with the same symbol burned into my hand. The heart of the house. I could feel it. This was where it began. And where it would end. Carol hesitated. "Don't open it." But I was already reaching for the handle. "We can't run anymore." The door creaked open, revealing a spiral staircase descending into darkness. And the lullaby stopped. Silence. The house was waiting. I took the first step down. The stairs groaned under my weight, each step sinking into shadow. Carol followed, close behind. The walls closed in, tighter with every turn. And then, a whisper. "Welcome home." Helen's voice. But it wasn't ahead of us. It was behind. Turned. And there, standing at the top of the stairs, Helen smiled. "You can't escape family." And she closed the door. Some walls are meant to protect us. But others are built to trap us. Every step we took in that house wasn't ours to make. We weren't walking through memories. We were walking into a story that had already been written. And now, it was time for the final chapter to be read. The ground rumbled beneath us, the old walls of the house groaning like a beast slowly stirring from its slumber. Dust cascaded from the ceiling as picture frames shook on the walls, their glass cracking. Carol gripped my arm tightly, her voice trembling. "Elena, something's wrong." Wrong. Everything was wrong. But this was something more. The house itself was awakening. I could feel it. Every creak, every groan of the wood wasn't random. It was breathing, watching, waiting. "We need to move," I whispered. But where could we go when the walls themselves were closing in? The familiar hallways twisted unnaturally, doors appearing and disappearing. No matter how many corners we turned, we ended up back where we started. The same hallway, the same portraits. But now the faces in those portraits were watching us. And smiling. Helen's voice echoed faintly through the air. Barely a whisper. "You can't run, Elena. Not from this. Not from yourself." "She's lying," Carol hissed, pulling me forward. But I wasn't sure anymore. Because the house wasn't trying to kill us. It was showing us something. Guiding us. To where it all began. We stumbled into a massive room. Its walls lined with massive portraits of the family. But these weren't the faded paintings of distant ancestors. These were new, realistic, vivid, and they weren't hanging on the walls. They were moving. The paintings pulsed like living memories, scenes playing out inside their frames. One showed my grandmother, Evelyn, whispering to my mother in the dead of night. Another showed Helen, carving symbols into the mirror's frame. But the largest painting in the center froze me in place. It was me, standing before the broken mirror, hand outstretched. But I wasn't alone. Helen stood behind me smiling. And beside her, my mother, smiling the same way. "No," I whispered. Carol's grip tightened. "Elena, what is this?" "It's not just a curse," I breathed. "It's a legacy." The walls trembled as Helen's voice returned, louder, closer. "We didn't trap you here, Elena. You were born into this. Every woman in this family carried this burden. And now it's your turn." The paintings flickered, showing generations of women, all standing before the mirror, all performing the same ritual. "This isn't fate," I snarled. "It's manipulation." But Helen only laughed. "Call it what you want. You were always going to end up here." A door appeared at the far end of the gallery. Unlike the others, this one was open. A soft, cold light seeped through the crack. Without speaking, Carol and I stepped through. We entered a circular room, its walls covered in ancient, crumbling symbols. At the center stood a small, ornate table. And on it, mirror. But not broken. Not yet. This was the original. The source. The mirror where it all began. "This is it," I muttered. Carol's voice was barely a whisper. "What do we do?" I stared at the mirror. My reflection. But it wasn't just me staring back. It was all of them. Helen, my mother, Evelyn, all smiling. "We end it," I said, stepping forward. Helen's voice filled the room, softer now. Almost tender. "You can break it, Elena. Smash it into dust. But if you do, you'll destroy yourself too. Or you can finish what they started. Become what you were meant to be." My hand hovered over the mirror, and I felt it. Pull. The promise of control. Power. But I also saw the price. The darkness creeping through the cracks in my soul. I looked at Carol. Her eyes pleaded with me. "Elena, please." And for the first time I wasn't sure what to do. The mirror trembled beneath my touch. Cracks slowly crawled across its surface. The house groaned. The walls shook. "Choose." Helen's voice was ice. "Now." And I knew. There was no saving everyone. Only a choice. Destroy the mirror. And risk taking myself with it. Or accept it. And become the very thing I feared. I raised my hand. And in that moment I made my choice. Sometimes the greatest horrors are not the monsters that lurk in the dark, but the secrets we've carried for generations. And now, those secrets were screaming to be heard. The walls of the house trembled, groaning under the weight of the darkness that had awakened. Splinters of wood cracked beneath our feet as the floorboards began to warp and twist. Carol's grip on my arm tightened. "Elena, we have to get out. The house, it's falling apart." But I couldn't move. Not yet. Because in the corner of the room, behind the fractured mirror and decaying wallpaper, was something I hadn't seen before. Door. Unassuming. But pulsing faintly with that same dark glow. "No," I whispered, more to myself than to Carol. "It's not over. Not yet." I yanked the door open, the hinges screaming in protest. Behind it, a narrow staircase spiraled down into the earth. Cold air drifted up, thick with the scent of damp stone and something older. "Elena, please," Carol begged. But something deep in me knew. This was the heart of it all. I have to see. And without waiting, I descended into the dark. The stairs led to a cavernous chamber, carved directly into the earth. The walls were covered in carvings, symbols, names, dates, all etched by hand. And in the center of the room stood a massive stone altar. Upon it an ancient book lay open. Its pages were yellowed, but the ink was still vibrant. And the handwriting. It was my grandmother's. Elena, what is this? Carol's voice echoed in the stillness. I stepped closer, tracing the words with my fingers. It's a ledger, I murmured. A record of every generation. Names of family members. And beside them, symbols. Some were complete, others broken. These are the ones who resisted, I whispered. And these are the ones who accepted it. Accepted the darkness. Accepted the role. And now my name was being written. On its own. Did you really think you could break the cycle? The voice was soft, but it scraped against my mind like glass. Helen. But it wasn't coming from above. It was coming from the walls. From the carvings themselves. Her form began to take shape from the shadows. Her face flickering between Helen's and something far more ancient. You were always meant to be here, Elena. It was never about breaking the curse. Only about choosing when to embrace it. Carol stepped in front of me. Oh, we won't let you take her. But Helen only smiled. Oh, sweet child. I'm not taking her. She's already made her choice. I looked back at the altar, the book, the names. And it hit me. The rituals weren't meant to seal away the darkness. They were meant to bind it. Thus, each generation was a new vessel. And now it was my turn. But not because I was chosen. 'Cause I was born for this. No, I whispered. I won't be like you. Helen's form darkened, her smile fading. Then break the chain. Her voice was sharper now. If you can. On the altar beside the book was a dagger. Ancient. Its blade darkened with age, but sharp as the day it was forged. And beneath it, the final ritual was written. Voice. Blood or shadow. If I spilled my own blood, I could bind the curse to me, forever. 'Twould end here. But if I shattered the altar, the curse would scatter. Unbound. Free to infect anyone. Anywhere. Choose, Elena. Helen's voice was cold, final. But choose wisely. Carol's eyes locked with mine. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. But how could I choose? To bind the curse to myself. Or unleash it on the world. My hand trembled as I reached for the dagger. Felt heavy. Cold. But as my fingers closed around it, I heard the voices again. Not Helen. Not the shadows. But the echoes of my family. Those who had resisted. Those who had suffered. End it. End us. My grip tightened. And I raised the dagger high. The blade came down. And the chamber was filled with light.